The day my stepmother slapped me for wearing a necklace, I thought it was jealousy. I was wrong. That $2 million piece carried a secret clause, and the truth she had spent 20 years burying. She thought she was punishing me for stealing her jewelry, unaware Grandpa designed it to expose her and my father. By the time the judge read Grandpa's letter, the bruise on my cheek had faded, but the ruin of our family was just beginning. My name is Brielle Harlow, and as I walked through the metal detectors at the Lakeview County Courthouse, the only thing keeping me together was a layer of foundation thick enough to hide a car crash. My left cheek throbbed in time with my pulse, a dull, hot ache that had not subsided since the night before. I could feel the heat radiating under the expensive concealer I had applied with the precision of a surgeon. But to the rest of the world, I looked perfectly composed. I looked like the icy, ungrateful daughter my stepmother had been describing to anyone who would listen for the last decade. The security guard waved me through. I picked up my bag, the leather cool against my palm, and took a breath that tasted of floor wax and stale coffee. I was not here as a criminal defendant, though if you listen to the whispers in the gallery, you might think otherwise. Technically, I was the respondent in a civil suit regarding the misappropriation of family property, specifically a diamond necklace valued at $2 million. Simultaneously, I was the complaining witness in a domestic assault case against the woman suing me. It was a messy, entangled legal knot that most families would try to pick apart in private mediation. But the Harlows were not most families. Victoria made sure of that. I pushed open the heavy oak doors of courtroom 4. The air inside was still and cold, conditioned to a temperature that felt designed to numb the nerves. And there they were. Victoria Harlow sat at the plaintiff's table, looking like she had stepped straight out of a catalog for grieving aristocrats. She wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my first car. Cut modest enough to suggest humility, but tailored sharp enough to scream wealth. Her hair was swept back in a soft, elegant bun, and she dabbed at dry eyes with a linen handkerchief. Beside her sat Arthur Sterling, a civil litigator whose billboards lined the highway into Denver. He was known for 2 things: winning inheritance disputes and destroying the reputations of anyone who stood in the way of his clients' payouts. Then there was my father. Daniel Harlow sat on the other side of Victoria, his hand resting protectively near her elbow. He did not look up when I entered. He studied the grain of the wooden table, as if the secrets of the universe were written in the varnish. He looked thinner than I remembered, his suit hanging slightly loose at the shoulders, the posture of a man carrying the weight of significant debt. Yet, there he was, playing the role of the devoted husband, the anchor for his fragile, victimized wife. Seeing him there, refusing to meet the eyes of the daughter whose face was still swollen from his wife's hand, sparked a cold, hard knot in my stomach. It was not sadness. I think I had burned through my reserves of sadness regarding Daniel Harlow years ago. This was clarity. I took my seat at the defense table. My lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense man named David Thorne, gave me a brief nod. "How is the cheek?" he asked, his voice low. "Covered," I replied. "Let's just get this over with." "All rise," the bailiff announced. Judge Beverly Watkins swept into the room. She was a woman in her 60s with eyes that looked like they could cut glass. She took her seat, adjusted her glasses, and looked down at the docket. "We have 2 matters before the court that have been consolidated for this preliminary hearing due to the overlapping evidence and parties," Judge Watkins said, her voice dry. "The matter of the temporary restraining order and assault complaint filed by Ms. Brielle Harlow against Mrs. Victoria Harlow, and the emergency motion for the return of property filed by Mrs. Harlow against Ms. Harlow regarding 1 diamond necklace. Mr. Sterling, you may proceed." Victoria's lawyer stood up, buttoning his jacket with a practiced smoothness. He walked to the center of the room, his voice booming with theatrical baritone. "Your Honor," Sterling began, gesturing toward Victoria as if she were a wounded dove. "We are here today because of a tragedy, not a tragedy of violence, as the defendant would have you believe, but a tragedy of mental instability. My client, Mrs. Harlow, has spent 10 years trying to be a mother to a young woman who has fundamentally rejected her. Last night, during a charity gala meant to honor the family legacy, the defendant, in a fit of jealousy and entitlement, seized a family heirloom, a necklace valued at $2 million, and refused to return it. When Mrs. Harlow attempted to retrieve the item to safeguard it, the defendant became hysterical. I sat perfectly still, my hands clasped on the table. Beside me, David was taking notes, his pen scratching rhythmically against the legal pad. "The accusations of assault," Sterling continued, dropping his voice to a conspiratorial whisper, "are nothing more than a smokescreen, a leverage tactic concocted by a troubled young woman to extort money and property from her father and stepmother. We have affidavits from family friends stating that Brielle has a history of erratic behavior. We are simply asking for the return of the $2 million asset and a dismissal of these frivolous assault charges." Sterling sat down, looking pleased with himself. He had painted the picture perfectly: the crazy, greedy stepdaughter versus the saintly, besieged stepmother. In the gallery, I could hear the rustle of fabric as reporters leaned in. This was the narrative Victoria had prepared. It was the story she had been planting in the garden of public opinion for years. Judge Watkins looked over her glasses at me. "Mr. Thorne?" David stood up. He did not button his jacket. He did not use a theatrical voice. He simply picked up a single piece of paper from his file. "Your Honor," David said, "counsel for the plaintiff enjoys a good story. However, the court deals in facts, and before we address the necklace, I believe it is relevant to establish the credibility of my client, whom Mr. Sterling has just characterized as unstable and erratic." David walked toward the bench and handed the paper to the clerk. "Please read the occupation and current employer of the defendant for the record," David requested. The clerk, a young woman with a tired expression, took the paper. She adjusted the microphone. The room went silent. "Name, Brielle Harlow," the clerk read. "Occupation, senior fraud investigator. Employer, Northbridge Insight Group." The silence that followed was heavy, textured. It wasn't just quiet. It was the sound of air being sucked out of the room. Northbridge Insight Group was not just a company. It was the premier financial forensics firm in the state. We were the people corporations called when millions went missing, and they wanted to know which executive was cooking the books. We were the people who found the money that no one else could find. I saw Arthur Sterling freeze. His hand hovered over his water glass. He had clearly expected me to be listed as a student, or perhaps unemployed, or freelance consultant. He had not done his homework. He did not know that the quiet girl who sat in the back of family gatherings had grown up to become a hunter of financial predators. Judge Watkins looked from the paper to me. Her eyebrows rose, just a fraction of an inch. "Senior fraud investigator?" she repeated. "Yes, Your Honor," David said. "My client specializes in complex asset tracing and embezzlement schemes. It strikes the defense as highly unlikely that a certified fraud examiner, vetted by federal agencies for her license, would resort to petty theft and hysterical outbursts in a hotel hallway." Victoria's mask slipped, just for a second. Her mouth tightened into a thin, ugly line. She turned to Daniel, whispering something urgent, but Daniel kept his eyes on the table, his face pale. I allowed myself a small, cold breath of satisfaction, but as I sat there, the physical memory of the previous night washed over me, drowning out the courtroom. Flashback. The smell of expensive perfume and old dust, the heavy velvet curtains of the hotel's VIP room blocking out the sound of the party outside. Victoria's face was inches from mine, her eyes wide with a manic intensity I had never seen before. "Give it to me," she had hissed, her fingers clawing at my neck. "You have no right." "It was my mother's," I had said, my voice shaking but my hands firm on the clasp. "Grandpa designed it for her." That was when she snapped. It wasn't a push. It wasn't a shove. It was a calculated, vicious strike. Her open palm connected with my cheek with a sound like a cracking whip. The force of it threw my head back. Slamming it against the doorframe, I tasted copper. I felt the delicate gold clasp at the back of my neck twist, heard the sickening crunch of metal under stress. She grabbed my shoulders, her nails digging into the silk of my dress. "You think you know who this family is?" she spat, her spit landing on my cheek. "You are nothing. That necklace belongs to me, not your mother, not that weak, pathetic woman who couldn't even hold on to her husband, let alone her jewelry." End flashback. "Ms. Harlow?" The judge's voice brought me back to the present. The throbbing in my cheek was a reminder. It belongs to me. That was what she had said. Not it belongs to the family estate. Not it belongs to your father. Me. David was speaking again. "Your Honor, this case is not about a necklace. It is not about a domestic dispute. It is about a 20-year financial scheme my client has started to uncover. The necklace in question is evidence. It is not merely jewelry. It is a physical key to a trust that Mrs. Harlow and Mr. Harlow have been systematically draining for a decade." "Objection!" Sterling shot up, his face red. "This is a property hearing, not a RICO trial. These are wild, unsubstantiated allegations meant to smear my client." "If they are unsubstantiated," Judge Watkins said calmly, "then you have nothing to worry about, Mr. Sterling. Overruled." The judge leaned forward, clasping her hands. She looked at Victoria, then at me. "I am going to bifurcate these proceedings," Judge Watkins ruled. "The assault charge will be handled in criminal court, pending the district attorney's review of the evidence. However, regarding the civil suit for the necklace, I am ordering that the item be placed in the court's secure escrow immediately, pending a full hearing on the ownership." "But, Your Honor," Sterling protested, "my client needs the necklace for—" "For what, Counselor?" Judge Watkins cut him off. "To wear to another gala? It is a $2 million disputed asset. It goes to the vault." She paused, looking at the files in front of her. "Furthermore, given the defendant's professional credentials and the specific nature of the defense's claims regarding a financial scheme, I am granting the defense's motion for discovery regarding the financial history of the necklace and its provenance. If this jewelry is indeed part of a larger trust, as Mr. Thorne suggests, this court needs to see the paperwork, all of it, all of Victoria went rigid. I saw her hand grip the edge of the table so hard her knuckles turned white. This was the one thing she had never anticipated. She thought she could drag me into court, humiliate me, and force me to hand over the necklace to avoid a scene. She thought I was still the teenager she could bully into silence. She didn't realize that by dragging me here, she had handed me the subpoena power I needed to tear her life apart. "We will reconvene in 3 weeks," Judge Watkins said, banging her gavel. "And Mr. Harlow?" My father jumped, his head snapping up as if he had been physically struck. "Yes, Your Honor. If I find out that any assets related to this dispute are moved, sold, or encumbered between now and the trial date, I will hold you in contempt. Do I make myself clear?" "Yes," Daniel whispered. "Yes, Your Honor." Court is adjourned. As the room broke into movement, Victoria stood up slowly. She smoothed her skirt, regained her composure, and turned to look at me. The mask was back in place. She looked at me with a pitying smile, shaking her head slightly as if I were a disappointment she simply had to endure. "You really enjoy making a scene, don't you, Brielle?" she said, loud enough for the lingering reporters to hear. "Just like your mother, always desperate for attention." She didn't wait for an answer. She took my father's arm and guided him out of the courtroom, her head held high, looking every inch the aristocrat. She thought she had won the moment. She thought that because the judge hadn't thrown her in handcuffs right there, she was safe. She thought that senior fraud investigator was just a fancy title I used to impress people at cocktail parties. I stood up, gathering my files. My cheek still burned, but the sensation was different now. It wasn't just pain, it was fuel. "You okay?" David asked, closing his briefcase. "I'm fine," I said, my voice steady. "We got the discovery order," he said, a small smile playing on his lips. "That's the crack in the dam." "It's not just a crack, David," I replied. looking at the empty doorway where my father had just disappeared without a single backward glance. It's a demolition charge. I walked out of the courtroom, my heels clicking rhythmically on the marble floor. Victoria Harlow had spent 20 years building a fortress of lies on the foundation of my grandfather's money and my mother's memory. She thought she was the only one who knew how to play the game. She thought she was untouchable. But as I pushed through the heavy doors and into the bright, blinding sunlight of the Colorado afternoon, I touched the spot on my cheek again. Grandpa meant that necklace for Mom, I thought, and he meant for me to find out why. The bruise would fade in a few days, but what I was about to do to the Harlow family name, that was going to leave a mark that would never wash off. The war had officially begun. Driving away from the courthouse that afternoon, the silence in my car felt heavy, but it was a familiar weight. It was the same silence that used to fill the hallways of the Victorian house in Maple Ridge, where I spent the better part of my childhood. The media painted my upbringing as a privileged existence funded by old money, but the reality was far quieter and infinitely lonelier. I did not grow up in the lap of luxury. I grew up in the shadow of grief, raised by a man who spent his twilight years trying to teach me how to see the things people tried to hide. I was 10 years old when my mother, Elena Grant, died. It was a car accident on an icy road just outside of town. I remember the police lights reflecting off the snow, turning the white drifts into a bruising shade of blue and red. I remember the way the cold air hit my lungs when the officer opened the door to tell us. But mostly, I remember that after that night, my father stopped being a father and became a ghost that occasionally visited for dinner. I was sent to live with my grandfather, Leonard Grant. He was a retired estate lawyer, a man made of tweed jackets, the smell of old parchment, and a spine of steel. He lived in Maple Ridge, a small town in Colorado where everyone knew your business, but had the decency to whisper it behind closed doors. Grandpa Leonard was not a warm man in the traditional sense. He did not bake cookies or offer hugs for scraped knees. Instead, he offered lessons. He treated me like a small adult, perhaps because he knew the childhood part of my life had died in that car crash along with my mother. We spent our evenings in his study, a room lined with law books that reached the ceiling. He would tell me stories about his old cases, about siblings who tore each other apart over silverware, and children who sued their parents for trust funds they had not earned. "Brielle," he would say, looking at me over the rim of his reading glasses, "money does not rot families. People choose to let it rot them. Money is just the magnifying glass that shows you who they really are." There was one object that haunted those stories, though we rarely spoke of it directly. My mother had owned a diamond necklace. Grandpa had designed it himself years ago, commissioning a jeweler in Denver to craft it specifically for her 25th birthday. It was a stunning piece, intricate and heavy, with a central diamond that seemed to hold its own light. I had seen it in photos, draped around my mother's neck, making her look like royalty. But after the accident, the necklace vanished. It was not in her effects. It was not in the car. It was simply gone. Grandpa never speculated aloud about where it went, but sometimes I would catch him staring at the empty velvet space in her jewelry box, his jaw set tight, his eyes filled with a suspicion he refused to voice to a 10-year-old. And then there was Daniel, my father. To call him absent would imply that he was supposed to be present. After Mom died, Daniel retreated to a condo in the city, claiming he needed to be closer to his work, though the nature of that work always remained vague. He became a visitor in my life. He would show up for Thanksgiving and Christmas, arriving late and leaving early. He never raised his voice. He never hit me. He never drank to excess in front of me. He was simply a void. He was a man who had decided that raising a grieving daughter was a task too heavy for his shoulders, so he set it down and walked away. That systematic absence taught me independence faster than any boarding school could have. By the time I was 12, I knew how to fix a leaky faucet and balance a checkbook. By 14, I stopped waiting by the window for his car to pull into the driveway. Then, when I was 15, the void was filled. Daniel came to Maple Ridge on a random Tuesday in October. He was not alone. He brought a woman with him, and from the moment she stepped out of his leased Mercedes, the atmosphere in our quiet house shifted. "Brielle, Dad," Daniel said, his voice carrying a nervous energy I wasn't used to. "I want you to meet Victoria." Victoria was stunning. There was no other word for it. She was in her early 30s, a widow herself. She claimed, working in high-end real estate. She wore a camel-colored coat that looked like it cost more than Grandpa's car, and her hair was a perfect curtain of blonde silk. She smiled at me, and it was a perfect smile, too perfect. It didn't reach her eyes. Her eyes were scanning the house, the antique furniture, the land beyond the window. They were appraising. "It is so wonderful to finally meet you, Brielle," she said, her voice smooth as expensive whiskey. "Daniel talks about you all the time." I knew that was a lie. Daniel barely spoke to me. I doubted he spoke about me, but I shook her hand. Her palm was cool and dry. "I thought it was time," Daniel said, putting a hand on her lower back. "Time for us to be a family again, Victoria. She understands loss. She wants to help make us whole." Grandpa Leonard watched this performance from his armchair, his face unreadable. He was polite, offering them tea, but I saw the way his hand gripped the handle of his cane. He smelled the predator in the room long before I did. Over the next 2 years, Victoria became a fixture. She and Daniel married 6 months later in a small, tasteful ceremony that I was invited to but not asked to participate in. Victoria was careful. She was not the wicked stepmother from the fairy tales. She didn't lock me in the attic or force me to scrub floors. Her cruelty was far more sophisticated. It was the cruelty of erasure. She would come to dinner and dominate the conversation, steering every topic toward real estate, investments, and the future. She treated my mother's memory not with scorn, but with a pitying condescension that was infinitely worse. "Oh, poor Elena," she would say, looking at a portrait on the mantelpiece. "She had such quaint taste. It is sweet, really, very rustic." Then she would turn to Grandpa. "Leonard, Daniel tells me you still hold the deeds to those parcels up in Alpine Creek. The market is exploding right now. Holding on to raw land is practically throwing money away. Have you thought about liquefying?" Grandpa would sip his tea, his eyes sharp. "I am not in need of liquid, Victoria. The land sits where it sits." "Of course," she would soothe, placing a manicured hand on his arm. "We just want to make sure your assets are working for you. Daniel worries. You know, managing an estate this size. It is a burden." I sat there, 17 years old, invisible, if I tried to speak, to talk about school or my debate team. Victoria would smile a tight, patient smile, wait for me to finish, and then turn back to the men. "Why don't you go check on dessert? Brielle, the adults are boring you with business talk." She pushed me out of the circle, inch by inch, until I felt like a guest in my own home. Daniel let her do it. He would sit there, nodding along with whatever she said, desperate to keep her happy. He looked at her with a mixture of adoration and fear. She was his lifeline to a lifestyle he couldn't afford on his own, and he was willing to pay for it with his daughter's dignity. The defining moment of my adolescence came during my senior year of high school. When acceptance letters began to arrive, I had been accepted to the University of Denver, a good school, but expensive. We were gathered in the dining room. I had placed the acceptance letter on the table, proud. "That is expensive," Daniel said immediately, frowning at the tuition figure. "Brielle, we have discussed this. The market is tight right now. I don't know if I can commit to 4 years of this." My stomach dropped. "But you said—" "I said we would see." Daniel cut me off, looking at Victoria for support. Victoria sighed, picking up a napkin and dabbing the corner of her mouth. "It is a lovely school, Brielle, but really, is it practical? Perhaps a community college for 2 years would be more realistic. Daniel has a lot of overhead right now." "Overhead," I repeated, looking at the new diamond bracelet on her wrist. "Don't be rude," Daniel snapped. It was one of the few times he raised his voice. Grandpa Leonard cleared his throat. The sound was like a gavel striking wood. "The tuition is taken care of," he said calmly. Victoria froze. Excuse me? I set up an education trust for Brielle the day she was born, Grandpa said. It is fully funded. She can go to Harvard if she gets in. She is going to Denver. The relief that washed over me was so intense I almost cried. But then I saw Victoria's face. For a split second, the mask dropped. She wasn't happy for me. She wasn't relieved that her husband didn't have to pay. She was furious. She was looking at Grandpa not with gratitude, but with calculation. She was doing the math in her head, subtracting 4 years of private university tuition from the inheritance she was already mentally spending. Well, Daniel stammered, trying to recover the proud father persona. That is, generous, Dad, very generous. I am proud of you. Brielle. What will you study? Victoria asked, her voice brittle. Art history? Something fun? Accounting, I said. Forensic accounting. Victoria blinked. Accounting? That sounds dreadfully dry. Not just accounting, I corrected, feeling a surge of defiance. Fraud investigation. I want to find hidden money. I want to understand how people cook books and hide assets. I looked at her when I said it. It was the first time I truly challenged her. I saw a flicker of something in her eyes. It wasn't fear. She didn't think I was a threat yet. It was wariness. She looked at me the way a thief looks at a security camera they hadn't noticed before. How ambitious, she murmured, taking a sip of wine. Though I suppose digging through other people's trash is a living. It is not trash, Grandpa said softly. It is the truth, and truth is the only currency that doesn't devalue. That summer, before I left for Denver, the atmosphere in the house changed. Victoria came around less often, but Daniel called Grandpa more. I would hear Grandpa on the phone, his voice weary, saying no over and over again. I didn't know what they were asking for, but I knew Victoria was behind it. She had realized that the old man wasn't going to liquidate his assets voluntarily, so she had switched tactics. On the morning I packed my car to leave, Grandpa stood on the porch. He looked older, frailer. The stress of the last few months seemed to have etched deeper lines into his face. He handed me a check for my living expenses, an amount that was generous but not excessive. He placed his hand on my shoulder. His grip was still strong, the grip of a man who had held onto his principles while the world changed around him. Brielle, he said quietly, so the neighbors wouldn't hear. You are going into a world where people will smile at you while they pick your pocket. You have seen it happen at this very dinner table. I nodded, a lump forming in my throat. I know, Grandpa. Your father. He paused, looking at the driveway where Daniel's car usually sat. Empty now. He is not a bad man, but he is a weak one, and weakness is dangerous when it is led by greed. He looked me right in the eyes. In any family, especially one with a little bit of money, you have to remember, the person who hides the money is always hiding the truth. They go hand in hand. Never stop looking for the ledger. Brielle, the ledger never lies. I won't, I promised. I will make you proud. You already have, he said. Just promise me one thing. When you get good at this, when you learn how to see what is hidden, don't let it make you cold. Don't become like her. I hugged him then, breathing in the scent of tobacco and old wool. I didn't know it would be the last time I would hug him while he was truly himself, before the decline, before the fog of medication and confusion set in. Convenient confusion, encouraged by the new caregivers Victoria would eventually hire. I drove away from Maple Ridge with a full tank of gas and a heart full of quiet rage. I chose my career to honor him, to be the kind of person who could protect people like my mother and grandfather. I studied hard. I spent nights in the library poring over case studies of embezzlement and Ponzi schemes. I learned how to track shell companies and decode offshore accounts. I thought I was preparing for a career. I didn't realize I was sharpening a blade. Victoria thought she had won when I left. She thought she had successfully pushed the extra child out of the nest so she could focus on the golden goose. She watched me drive away with a smug satisfaction, thinking I was just a girl going off to study boring numbers. She had no idea that she had just sent her greatest enemy to boot camp, And 20 years later, standing in that courtroom with a bruise on my cheek, I knew something she didn't. I knew where the bodies were buried, because I had spent my entire adult life learning how to dig. The invitation had arrived on my desk at Northbridge Insight Group 3 weeks earlier. It was heavy cardstock, cream-colored with gold-embossed lettering that screamed pretentious gentility. The Harlow Grant Legacy Gala, a night of charity and remembrance. It was being held at the Ridgepoint Grand Hotel, a venue so expensive that the air inside probably cost $5 a breath. I am 29 years old now. I have my own apartment in downtown Denver, a mortgage I pay with my own salary, and a reputation as a woman who can find a single missing cent in a stack of corporate ledgers a mile high. I did not need the Harlows, I did not need their money, and I certainly did not need their approval. Yet, I RSVP'd yes. I told myself it was professional curiosity. I told myself I wanted to see if Daniel looked as tired as he sounded in his rare voicemails. But the truth was the line at the bottom of the invitation, featuring a retrospective display of the late Elena Grant's vintage collection. They were using my mother as a prop, again. The evening of the gala, the Ridgepoint Grand was a fortress of light and noise. Valets in red jackets were parking Ferraris and Bentleys, and the red carpet was a sea of sequins and tuxedos. I walked in through a side entrance, bypassing the press line. I was wearing a navy silk dress I had bought with my year-end bonus. It was sharp, architectural, and completely unadorned. I was not there to sparkle. I was there to observe. "Ms. Harlow?" A large man with an earpiece intercepted me near the coat check. He wore the insignia of a private security firm, not the hotel staff. "Yes," I said, instinctively tightening my grip on my clutch. "Mrs. Harlow requested you come to the secure holding area behind the stage immediately," he said. "It wasn't a request. There is a wardrobe adjustment." "I am not part of the show," I replied coldly. "She said it concerns your mother's estate items." That stopped me. I followed him through the labyrinth of service corridors, the smell of expensive perfume fading into the scent of industrial cleaner and Sterner heating fuel. We arrived at a small, well-lit room guarded by 2 more men. Inside, a table was set up with a single black velvet box. The guard gestured to it. "Mrs. Harlow left instructions. You are to wear this for the keynote speech. She wants the family to present a united front when the donation is announced." I approached the table. My hands were steady, but my heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I reached out and flipped the lid open. The breath left my lungs in a sharp rush. It was there, the necklace. I hadn't seen it since I was 10 years old, but I knew every facet of it. It was a platinum cascade of diamonds, intricate and flowing like water, culminating in a pear-shaped center stone that seemed to hold a blue fire deep within its heart. My grandfather, Leonard, had sketched this design at the kitchen table. I remembered him showing me the drawings, explaining how the setting had to be strong enough to protect the stone but delicate enough to let the light through. "It is meant for the center stage," the guard said, checking his watch. "You have 5 minutes." I lifted the necklace. It was heavier than I expected. Cold, as I fastened it around my neck, my fingers brushed the clasp. It was a box clasp, unusually large and thick for such a delicate piece. When I snapped it shut, it didn't just click. It engaged with a solid, mechanical thud that vibrated against my cervical spine. It felt less like jewelry and more like a piece of machinery. I looked in the mirror propped against the wall. The diamonds blazed against the dark navy of my dress. For a second, I didn't see myself. I saw my mother, laughing in the hallway of the Maple Ridge house, the necklace catching the afternoon sun. "Time to go," the guard said. I walked out into the wings of the stage. The ballroom was cavernous, filled with 500 of Colorado's wealthiest citizens. Victoria was at the podium. She looked radiant in emerald green, the picture of the benevolent matriarch. Daniel stood a few feet behind her, smiling that fixed, empty smile that never reached his eyes. "And now," Victoria announced, her voice trembling with manufactured emotion, "I want to invite my daughter, Brielle, to the stage. Tonight, she wears a very special piece of our history, a symbol of the love that started this family. The spotlight hit me. It was blinding. I walked out, the necklace feeling like a yoke of ice around my throat. The applause was polite, rippling through the room like rain. Victoria reached out and took my hand. Her grip was tight, her nails digging into my palm just enough to hurt, while her face beamed with love. "Look at this," she cooed into the microphone, gesturing to my neck. "My husband, Daniel, bought this for his late wife, Elena, 20 years ago. He worked double shifts, saved every penny, just to give her something beautiful. And now, we preserve it as a symbol of the Harlow resilience." The lie washed over me, hot and suffocating. Daniel hadn't bought this. He couldn't have afforded the clasp, let alone the diamonds. Grandpa Leonard had paid for it. Grandpa Leonard had designed it. Daniel had barely been able to pay the heating bill back then. I looked at Daniel. He was staring at his shoes, unable to witness the theft of his own father's legacy. I wanted to rip her hand away. I wanted to grab the microphone and scream the truth, but 20 years of discipline held me in place. I stood there, a mannequin in diamonds, letting her use my body and my mother's memory to sell her lie. "Thank you, Brielle," she whispered, leaning in to hug me. "Don't go anywhere. We need photos." The applause swelled again as we exited the stage. The moment we crossed the threshold from the public ballroom to the private backstage corridor, the atmosphere shattered. The warmth vanished from Victoria's face so fast it was terrifying. She didn't let go of my arm. Instead, she dug her fingers in harder, dragging me past the security guards, past the catering staff, toward the VIP green room at the end of the hall. "Open it," she snapped at a guard. He unlocked the door. She shoved me inside and slammed the door shut. The lock clicked with a finality that made my stomach turn. The room was plush, filled with white sofas and champagne buckets, but it felt like a cage. Victoria spun around, her chest heaving. The emerald dress no longer looked elegant. It looked like armor. "Take it off," she hissed. I stepped back, my hand going instinctively to my throat. "What?" "The necklace," she demanded, stepping closer. "Take it off, now." "You just told 500 people it was a symbol of family," I said, my voice finding its edge. "You wanted me to wear it." "I wanted you to model it," she spat. "I didn't say you could keep it. That necklace is worth $2 million. You ungrateful little brat. Do you think I trust you with it?" "It was my mother's," I said, backing up until my legs hit the edge of a low table. "Grandpa designed it. It is not yours to take." "Grandpa designed it," she mocked, her voice high and cruel. "Grandpa this, Grandpa that. You are just like him, stubborn, arrogant, thinking you are better than everyone, because you have the Grant blood." She lunged. It wasn't a graceful movement. It was a feral grab. Her hands went for my throat. I flinched, trying to twist away, but she was faster and stronger than she looked. Her fingers hooked into the chain of diamonds. "Give it to me!" she screamed. "No!" I shouted, grabbing her wrists. "It is mine! Grandpa left it to me!" "He left you nothing!" And then, she hit me. It wasn't a slap meant to discipline a child. It was a blow meant to hurt. Her open palm connected with the left side of my face with a force that snapped my head to the side. The sound was loud, a sharp crack that echoed in the small room. My vision went white for a second. I stumbled, falling back onto the sofa. My cheek felt like it was on fire. The taste of blood filled my mouth where my tooth had cut my inner lip. Victoria didn't stop. She loomed over me, breathing hard, her eyes wild. She grabbed the necklace again, yanking it with both hands. I felt the metal bite into the back of my neck. Snap. A sickening sound of metal straining. The chain held, but something inside the heavy box clasp gave way. A tiny piece of internal machinery broke. "You stupid girl," she panted, pulling harder. "You have no idea what this is, do you? You think it is just sparkle? That old fool hid everything in here, everything." I froze, despite the pain. "What are you talking about?" "The accounts," she yelled, losing all control. "The access codes. I spent 10 years forcing him to sign the transfers, 10 years getting him to move the money where I could reach it, and he locked the master key in this damn necklace. He thought he was so clever. She was admitting it. She was saying it out loud. The embezzlement, the coercion, the elderly abuse. You forced him? I whispered, my hand covering the clasp to protect it. He was senile, she shrieked. He didn't know what to do with that money. He was going to let it sit there while your father drowned in debt. I did what I had to do to save this family, and I am not letting you walk out of here with the only thing that can undo it. She grabbed my hair with one hand and the necklace with the other. I scrambled backward, adrenaline flooding my system. I was not a child anymore. I was a fraud investigator, and I was in a fight. I shoved her. I pushed her hard in the chest. She stumbled back in her high heels, catching herself on the arm of a chair. In the chaos, my thumb pressed hard against the underside of the broken clasp. I was trying to keep it closed, to keep it on my neck, but my finger found a small, recessed indentation I had not noticed before. Click. It was a tiny sound, barely audible over Victoria's heavy breathing. It wasn't the sound of the jewelry opening. It was the sound of something engaging. A mechanical trigger, a faint, high-pitched hum started, so quiet only someone with the necklace against their spine would feel the vibration. Victoria straightened up, her eyes narrowing. She looked like she was about to launch herself at me again. Then, a sharp rap on the door. Mrs. Harlow? A muffled voice from the hallway. The donors are waiting for the toast. The transformation was instant and terrifying. Victoria's shoulders dropped. The snarl vanished from her face, replaced instantly by a look of flustered concern. She smoothed her hair, checked her dress, and took a deep breath. She looked at me. "Fix your face," she whispered, her voice low and venomous. "If you say a word, I will tell them you attacked me. I will tell them you are on drugs. Who do you think they will believe? The philanthropist of the year? Or the estranged daughter who just showed up looking for a handout?" She turned and opened the door. "Oh, I am so sorry," she exclaimed to the staff member outside, her voice breathless. "We were just having an emotional moment. Brielle is so overwhelmed by her mother's memory. She needs a moment to compose herself." She looked back at me, her eyes promising retribution. "Take a minute, darling. We will see you out there." She walked out, closing the door softly behind her, leaving me alone in the silence of the VIP room. I sat there for a moment, trembling. My cheek throbbed with a violence that made my eyes water. I reached up and touched the skin. It was hot, tender. I looked at my hand, a smear of foundation and a tiny speck of blood. I touched the necklace. It was still there. The clasp felt different now. The click I had felt. It wasn't broken. It had changed state. I spent 10 years forcing him to sign. Her words echoed in my head. She had given me the motive. She had given me the timeline. And she had just tried to physically rip the evidence off my body. I stood up. My legs were shaky, but my mind was sharpening into a point of cold, hard clarity. I wasn't going back out there for the toast. I wasn't going to let her parade me around anymore. I walked to the mirror. The bruise was already starting to form under the makeup, a dark shadow blooming on my cheekbone. "Okay," I whispered to my reflection. "You want a war? You got one." I grabbed my clutch. I didn't go out the main door where the donors were waiting. I went out the service exit, past the confused catering staff, into the cool night air of the loading dock. As I walked toward my car, the clasp of the necklace hummed against my neck, a steady, rhythmic vibration. It felt like a heartbeat. It felt like Grandpa Leonard was whispering to me from the grave. The person who hides the money is always hiding the truth. I got into my car, locked the doors, and looked at the necklace in the rearview mirror. Whatever mechanism I had just triggered, whatever secret Grandpa had locked inside this platinum cage, Victoria was terrified of it, and for the first time in 20 years, I wasn't the one who was afraid. I started the engine. I had a bruise on my face, $2 million around my neck, and a crime scene of a confession ringing in my ears. I wasn't going home to sleep. I was going home to work. The investigation had just begun. I did not take the necklace off when I entered my apartment. I locked the deadbolt, engaged the chain, and walked straight to the bathroom. Under the harsh fluorescent vanity lights, I turned my back to the mirror, twisting my neck to get a clear view of the heavy platinum clasp that had caused so much chaos. My cheek was throbbing, a hot, rhythmic pulse that reminded me of Victoria's desperation, but the pain was secondary. The primary sensation was the cold weight of the jewelry against my skin and the memory of that mechanical click I had felt in the VIP room. I leaned in closer to the glass. The clasp was a box style, unusually thick for a piece designed 20 years ago. To the naked eye, it was just a secure locking mechanism, encrusted with paved diamonds to hide the joinery. But my eyes were not just naked, they were trained. I looked for the anomaly. I looked for the thing that did not belong. There. On the underside of the female end of the clasp, right near the safety latch, there was a microscopic indentation. It was not a scratch. It was perfectly circular, no larger than the tip of a sewing needle. I went to my emergency sewing kit in the hall closet and pulled out a steel pin. My hands, usually steady enough to sift through thousands of lines of Excel data without fatigue, were trembling slightly. I forced them to be still. I wasn't Brielle the victim right now. I was Brielle the investigator. I pressed the tip of the pin into the indentation. There was no resistance. The pin slid in, and with a soft, pneumatic hiss, a thin panel on the side of the clasp popped open. It was a false bottom, machined with such precision that the seam was invisible to the naked eye. I carefully removed the necklace and laid it on a velvet cloth on my desk. Inside the cavity sat a tiny rectangular slot, clearly meant for a microchip of some kind, and a strip of platinum engraved with a series of numbers, 214788. I grabbed my magnifying glass. The numbers were not random. They were etched in a font I recognized from old banking documents. It was the routing style used by private vaults, specifically the high-security facilities that operated outside the standard commercial banking system. I sat down at my computer. My workstation was a beast of a machine. 3 monitors humming with the potential to strip anyone's financial privacy away if they left a digital footprint. I didn't need to hack anything. People assume fraud investigation is about breaking into firewalls. It is not. It is about knowing that the truth is usually filed in public records that no one bothers to read. I started with the number, 214788. I ran it against the state's registry of secured assets and the older databases of private depository institutions in Colorado. Nothing. Then I remembered Grandpa Leonard's habits. He was a creature of loyalty. He used the same tailor for 40 years. He drank the same scotch. He would have used a bank he trusted. I pulled up the historical records of Grant and Associates, his old law firm. I looked for payments made for storage or custodial services in the years before he retired. I filtered the search for the decade leading up to his death. There it was, a recurring annual payment to Evermont Private Vaults. I cross-referenced the vault's numbering system. Evermont used a 6-digit client identifier, 214788. I typed the number into my case file notes. Then I went deeper. I accessed the public probate records from the county clerk's office, documents that are legally available to anyone who knows how to request them. I was looking for the asset manifest filed after Grandpa died. The list was long, detailing the house, the cars, the stocks, but there was no mention of a safe deposit box at Evermont. However, there was a trail. I found a dissolved entity in the Secretary of State's archives, a trust. The Elena and Descendants Fund. My breath hitched. Elena, my mother. The trust had been formed 20 years ago, shortly after Mom died. The trustee was Leonard Grant. The beneficiary was redacted in the public filing, which is standard for privacy, but the registered address for the trust's correspondence was the Evermont facility. The necklace was not just a pretty rock, it was the physical key, likely containing the chip needed to access the vault, and the code engraved inside was the box number. Victoria knew this. That was why she had panicked. That was why she had tried to rip it off my neck. She wasn't trying to steal a necklace. She was trying to confiscate the master key to a vault she couldn't open. My computer pinged. A high-priority email notification slid onto the main screen. Subject: Urgent. Demand for return of stolen property. Harlow v. Harlow. I didn't need to open it to know who it was from, but I clicked anyway. It was from Arthur Sterling, Victoria's pit bull lawyer. Ms. Harlow. The email read, the font stark and aggressive. This correspondence serves as formal notice. You are in possession of a chattel property valued in excess of $2 million, belonging to the estate of Daniel and Victoria Harlow. Your removal of this item from the Ridgepoint Hotel premises constitutes grand larceny. We are offering a grace period of 24 hours for the return of the item to my offices. Failure to comply will result in the immediate filing of criminal charges and a civil suit for damages. I leaned back in my chair and laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. They were terrified. If they thought I was a thief, they would have called the police immediately. You do not give a thief 24 hours to return a $2 million diamond unless you are afraid of what the thief might say to the cops. They wanted the necklace back quietly. They wanted to bury this before anyone asked why a piece of jewelry had a hidden compartment. I ignored the email. I had 24 hours. That was an eternity in my line of work. I opened a new spreadsheet. I titled it Project Legacy. I needed to understand why the vault mattered. If the trust existed, there had to be money flowing into it, or out of it, or more likely, money that should have been there was gone. I began to map the family's financial architecture. I pulled the property deeds for the real estate Victoria had purchased in the last 10 years. A penthouse in Denver, a vacation home in Vail, a commercial strip mall in Aurora. Then I looked at the financing. They were bought with large cash down payments. Where did the cash come from? Daniel's business had been mediocre for years. His construction firm had been hit hard by the recession and never fully recovered. Yet, Victoria was buying seven-figure properties. I started looking for the leaks. I couldn't access their private bank accounts without a subpoena, which I didn't have yet, but I could see the edges of the puzzle. I pulled up the UCC filings, public notices of liens and loans, for Grandpa Leonard's old assets. I found a pattern that made my blood run cold. Starting about 10 years ago, right around the time Grandpa's health began to decline, and Victoria hired those private nurses, there was a shift. Grandpa had liquidated a series of municipal bonds. The value was roughly $900,000. Where did it go? It didn't go into his main estate account. If it had, it would have been listed in the probate file I had just read. I looked at the timeline of Victoria's acquisitions. 3 months after Grandpa cashed out the bonds, Victoria's shell company, VHL Properties LLC, bought the condo in Vail. The down payment was almost exactly the same amount, minus a small percentage that looked like transaction fees. I kept digging. I looked for structuring. In the fraud world, we call it smurfing. It is when you move large sums of money in small chunks to avoid federal reporting thresholds. I found public records of transfers from Grandpa's investment portfolio to a joint account held by Daniel and Victoria. They were labeled as caregiver expenses or property management fees. They were consistently just under $10,000, $9,500, $9,800. Month after month, year after year. I stared at the screen, the blue light illuminating the bruise on my face. This was the family siphoning scheme. It was textbook. They had used his decline to bleed him dry. They had framed it as necessary expenses to manage his estate, but in reality, they were funneling his liquidity into their own pockets to fund Victoria's lifestyle and Daniel's failed business ventures. I closed my eyes and a memory surfaced. I was 24, visiting Grandpa. He was sitting in his wheelchair by the window, staring at the driveway. "Has Daniel come by?" he had asked. "Not this week, Grandpa," I had said. "He called," Grandpa whispered, his voice thin and reedy. "He needs signatures. Always signatures. He says the house is expensive to run. He says Victoria is working so hard to keep me comfortable." I hadn't understood then. I thought he was just confused. I thought he was complaining about the cost of heating the old Victorian mansion. I was so stupid. He wasn't talking about heating bills. He was talking about the price of his own captivity. They were charging him for the privilege of being ignored. They were robbing him and making him thank them for it. And the necklace? The necklace was the failsafe. Grandpa must have realized what was happening. He couldn't stop them. Maybe he was too frail. Or maybe they threatened to cut him off from me, the only person he loved. So he moved whatever was left, whatever he could save, into the Elena and Descendants Fund, locked it in the Evermont vault, and put the key around the neck of a ghost, my mother. He knew Victoria's vanity. He knew she would never sell the necklace. She would keep it as a trophy. She would parade it around. He hid the answer in the one place she would never let out of her sight, but was too self-absorbed to examine closely. The brilliance of it made me want to cry. The cruelty of it made me want to burn their world down. I looked at the email from Sterling again. Grand larceny. You have no idea, I whispered to the empty room. I wasn't just a daughter with a grievance anymore. I was a senior fraud investigator with a paper trail. I printed the spreadsheet. I printed the screenshots of the code. I printed the Secretary of State filing for the trust. I organized them into a binder. The label on the spine didn't say family. It said Exhibit A. They wanted a fight over a necklace. I was going to give them a war over a decade of financial predation. I picked up my phone and dialed David Thorne, the best litigator I knew. It was 2 a.m. He answered on the third ring, his voice groggy. Brielle, is everything okay? No. David, I said, my voice steady and cold as ice. But it is about to be very expensive for my father. I need you to draft a countersuit, and I need you to prepare a subpoena for Evermont private vaults. On what grounds? He asked, the sleep leaving his voice. On the grounds that I have the key, I said, looking at the platinum chain coiling on my desk like a snake. And I know exactly who stole the treasure. I hung up. The sun would be up in 4 hours. I had work to do. The bruise on my face throbbed one last time, a reminder of the debt they owed me. And unlike my father, I always collected my debts. The lobby of Evermont private vaults was quieter than a church and colder than a morgue. It was a fortress of polished marble and silence, buried 2 stories beneath the street level of downtown Denver. This was not a place for checking accounts or mortgages. This was a place where the wealthy stored the things they wanted to keep, and the secrets they wanted to bury. I walked to the reception desk, my heels clicking sharply against the stone floor. I carried my identification, the subpoena David had drafted just in case, and the necklace wrapped in a velvet cloth inside my purse. The clerk was a man who looked like he had been carved out of the same gray stone as the walls. He adjusted his glasses and looked at my driver's license, then typed something into his terminal. Ms. Harlow, he said, his voice barely a whisper. We have a standing access protocol for box 2147. However, the system indicates a dual authentication requirement, biometric and physical token. I have the token, I said. He nodded and buzzed me through the heavy steel gate. We walked down a long corridor lined with stainless steel drawers, the air smelling of recirculated oxygen and old dust. We stopped in front of a large, square locker. Please present the token for scanning, he said, pointing to a small, customized reader port next to the biometric pad. I took the necklace out. Even in the harsh fluorescent light of the vault, the diamonds seemed to hold a frantic, glittering energy. I turned the clasp over, exposing the tiny platinum interface I had discovered the night before. I pressed it against the reader. There was a moment of absolute stillness. Then, a green light flashed. A mechanical hum vibrated through the wall, followed by a heavy metallic thunk. Authentication confirmed, the clerk said, showing zero emotion. He turned his key in the lock, then stepped back. I will give you privacy. He retreated to the end of the hall. I took a breath, the air tasting of iron, and pulled the heavy door open. I expected to see gold. I expected to see stacks of cash or maybe more jewelry, but the box was almost entirely filled with paper. There was a thick, expandable file folder, its edges worn, and sitting on top of it, a single cream-colored envelope. It was sealed with red wax, stamped with a signet ring I hadn't seen in 15 years. On the front, in shaky but unmistakable handwriting, were the words, "To Brielle, open after I am gone." My hands trembled as I picked it up. I sat down on the small viewing stool provided for clients, the cold of the metal seeping through my skirt. I broke the seal. The scent of pipe tobacco and old cedar drifted out. My grandfather's smell. It hit me harder than the slap Victoria had given me. It was the smell of safety. I unfolded the letter. The date at the top was from 3 years ago, 6 months before he passed away. My dearest Brielle, if you are reading this, it means 2 things. First, that I have left this world, and second, that you were smart enough to look past the shine of the diamonds and find the mechanism of the truth. I always knew you would be. I must start with an apology. I failed you. When your mother died, I was too broken to see clearly. I trusted Daniel because he was her husband, and I wanted to believe that grief would make him a better man. I was wrong. I let him into the accounts to manage the estate because I was tired. Brielle, I was so tired. Then came Victoria. She is a shark in silk. My dear, she did not come into this family for love. She came for leverage. Over the last decade, she has whispered in my ear, telling me that we needed to consolidate the family assets, that the tax implications were too high, that I needed to sign over power of attorney to protect the legacy. I signed many things to keep the peace. I signed them because they controlled who came to visit me, and I was terrified they would keep you away if I fought back too hard. But I did not sign everything. The will that was read after my funeral, the one that left the bulk of the estate to Daniel with Victoria as executor, is a decoy. It is a valid legal document, yes, but it only covers the assets I held publicly. It does not cover the trust. The Elena and Descendants Fund owns everything that matters: the Alpine Creek land deeds, the diversified portfolio, the rights to my designs, and the beneficiary of that trust is you, solely you. I stopped reading, my heart hammering against my ribs. A decoy will. He had played the role of the senile old man perfectly, letting them think they had won the war for his signature, while he quietly moved the real treasury into a fortress they couldn't breach. However, the letter continued. I knew that if I simply gave this to you in a standard will, they would destroy you. They would claim I was incompetent. They would drag you through court for decades until the money was gone. I needed you to find this when you were ready, when you were strong enough to fight them. In this box, you will find the ammunition you need. I have kept copies of every power of attorney document they forced in front of me. Look at the margins. Brielle, look at my notes. I reached into the box and pulled out the thick file. I flipped it open. There were dozens of legal documents. On a transfer authorization form moving $50,000 to a shell company called VHL Management, Grandpa had written in blue ink, "Signed under duress. Victoria threatened to cancel Brielle's visit." On another, dated a month later, "I do not agree to this sale, but Daniel says there is no money for my medication otherwise." Tears pricked my eyes, hot and angry. They had held his health hostage. They had used me as a bargaining chip to rob him. I turned back to the letter. You will also find a medical evaluation from Dr. Evans, dated 2 days after I finalized the trust and the real will. I paid him in cash to conduct a full cognitive assessment. It proves I was of sound mind, fully aware of my assets and my heirs. It is the shield that will break their argument of incompetence. I found the report. It was there, stamped and notarized. Patient exhibits full cognitive recall, no signs of dementia. Judgment is sound. This piece of paper alone was worth more than the diamonds. It was the death knell for Victoria's inevitable claim that Grandpa was crazy. But it was the next paragraph of the letter that stopped my breath. There is one more thing. Brielle, something I have been too cowardly to speak of while I was alive. Your mother did not just die in an accident. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The silence of the vault became deafening. 2 weeks before the crash, Elena came to me. She was frantic. She had found paperwork in Daniel's home office. She suspected he was involved in something illegal. Insurance fraud, perhaps? or money laundering for his business partners. She told me she was going to file for divorce and take you away. She was going to go to the authorities. She died before she could make that appointment. I have no proof that they caused the crash. The police report said it was black ice, but the timing has haunted me for 20 years. And the way Daniel stopped grieving so quickly, the way he let Victoria take over, it sits heavy in my soul. I could not prove it then, but if you follow the money, Brielle, you might find what I could not. I stared at the paper, the ink blurred. My mother, my beautiful, laughing mother. She hadn't just been a victim of bad weather, she had been a threat. If you are reading this, the letter concluded, it means you have followed the path I laid out. You have become the investigator I knew you would be. Use these files. Take back what is yours. But listen to an old man's final wish. Do not let the hate swallow you. Justice is a tool. Revenge is a poison. Clear your mother's name. Expose their greed. But once it is done, walk away. Do not become like them. You are a grant. Brielle. We build things. We do not destroy them just for sport. I love you, my bright star. Grandpa. I set the letter down. My hands were shaking, but not from sadness anymore. It was a cold, vibrating rage. I reached into the box again and pulled out the last item, a handwritten ledger. It was a simple spiral notebook. Inside, Grandpa had recorded every time Daniel asked for money. August 12th. Daniel asked for $10,000 for roof repairs. No contractors ever came. September 4th. Victoria requested $15,000 for gala tickets to boost family image. Transfer went to her personal checking. Page after page, date after date. It was a forensic accountant's dream. It was a direct map of theft, written by the victim as it was happening. It showed intent. It showed manipulation. And combined with the medical report, it showed that they had been robbing a sane man who was documenting every crime while pretending to be helpless. I closed the box. The snap of the latch sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. I stood up. I felt different. When I had walked into this bank, I was a woman trying to defend herself against a lawsuit. Now, I was an executioner holding the axe. They had killed him. Maybe not with a gun or a knife, but they had killed him by inches, draining his life and his legacy to feed their own vanity. And my mother, the thought of her, terrified and planning to run, only to die on a dark road, made my blood run cold. I gathered the files. I put the letter in my purse, right next to my heart. I picked up the necklace, the key to all of this pain, and wrapped it back in the velvet. I walked out of the vault. The clerk looked up as I approached the desk. "Did you find what you needed, Ms. Harlow?" he asked. "Yes," I said. My voice was steady, devoid of any tremor. "I found everything." I walked up the stairs and out into the street. The sun was shining on Denver, bright and oblivious. People were rushing to lunch, laughing, talking on phones. They had no idea that a 20-year-old crime had just been solved in a basement beneath their feet. Victoria was probably at her lawyer's office right now, drafting more threats. Daniel was probably drinking scotch, telling himself he was a good man who had just had some bad luck. They had no idea what was coming for them. I clutched my bag tighter. I wasn't just going to win a lawsuit. I was going to dismantle their lives, brick by golden brick, and I was going to do it with the meticulous, cold precision that Grandpa Leonard had taught me. I hailed a cab. "Northbridge Insight Group," I told the driver. I wasn't going home to cry. I was going to the office to build the case that would end the Harlow legacy forever. I drove straight from the bank to the outskirts of Denver, to a neighborhood where the trees were old and the houses were built of sturdy brick that had weathered 50 winters. I was looking for a small brass plaque next to a heavy oak door. Harriet Lowell, attorney at law. Harriet had been my grandfather's lawyer for 30 years. She was a woman cut from the same cloth as him, sharp, principled, and utterly unimpressed by the trappings of modern wealth. 10 years ago, shortly after Victoria took over the management of the household, Harriet had been unceremoniously fired. Victoria had claimed Harriet was too old-fashioned and lacked the aggressive vision needed for the family's future. I knew the truth. Harriet was fired because she asked too many questions about why Daniel needed access to the principal of the estate. I rang the bell. Harriet opened it herself. She was in her 70s now, her hair white and pulled back in a severe knot, but her eyes behind her spectacles were as piercing as I remembered. "Brielle," she said, looking at me. Her gaze dropped instantly to the bruise on my cheek, then to the thick accordion folder in my hand. She didn't gasp. She didn't offer false sympathy. She just stepped back and held the door open. "I was wondering when you would finally come home." We sat in her study, surrounded by floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. I laid everything out on her mahogany desk: the necklace, the letter, the medical report, the ledger. Harriet picked up the letter from Grandpa. She read it slowly, her face unreadable. When she finished, she took off her glasses and wiped them with a cloth. "I told him," she said softly. "I told Leonard that trusting Daniel was like trusting a sieve to hold water, but he loved your mother so much. He saw her in Daniel, or at least he wanted to." "Do you have it?" I asked. "The will he mentions?" Harriet stood up and walked to a wall safe behind a painting of a landscape. She spun the dial with practiced fingers. "I have held on to this document for 10 years. Brielle, every time I saw your stepmother in the society pages, grinning like a cat who got the cream, I looked at this safe, but I couldn't move. My instructions were strict. Only produce it upon the request of the beneficiary or a court order." She pulled out a document bound in blue backing. "This supersedes everything. It was signed, witnessed, and notarized 2 days before the trust was funded. It explicitly revokes the will Daniel is currently operating under." She placed it on the desk. "You realize what this means? If we file this, we aren't just claiming the necklace. We are claiming that the last decade of their financial lives has been a fraud. They stole $900,000 from him." "Harriet," I said, my voice flat, "I have the transfers." Harriet looked at the bruising on my face again. "The face isn't the only thing they hit, is it? The bank account was the real victim." She tapped the file. "We are going to need more than just documents. We need a narrative. A judge needs to see the pattern, not just the numbers." "I have a team," I said. "I am bringing in a specialist." I called Owen Riley. Owen was the best forensic analyst at Northbridge Insight Group. He was a man who lacked a single sentimental bone in his body. He viewed human emotion as an inefficient variable in the equation of crime. I needed his eyes. I needed someone who wouldn't look at Daniel and see my father, but would look at him and see a suspect. We met at my office at Northbridge an hour later. The conference room was glass-walled, overlooking the Denver skyline. I pinned the timeline of Grandpa's decline on the whiteboard. Beside it, I taped the timeline of Victoria's real estate acquisitions. Owen sat at the table, typing furiously on his laptop as he digested the data I had pulled from the necklace's chip and the public records. "It is a classic structuring scheme," Owen said, not looking up. "Look at the withdrawal patterns from your grandfather's municipal bonds. They never took more than $9,500 at a time. They were terrified of the $10,000 reporting threshold. That shows intent. If they thought they were entitled to the money, they would have written a single check. Breaking it up means they knew they were stealing." "Total amount?" Harriet asked, leaning on her cane. "Confirmed at $912,000 over 8 years, Owen said. "And that is just the cash. That doesn't include the consulting fees Daniel paid himself from the estate for maintenance that was never done." I looked at the board. The arrows drawn in red marker connected the dates of Grandpa's doctor visits to the dates of the withdrawals. "They waited until he was sick," I said. "Every time he was hospitalized, there was a spike in withdrawals. They knew he wouldn't be checking the statements." "We need to prove coercion," Harriet said. "The numbers show theft, but Victoria will argue that Leonard gave it to them. She will say he was generous. She will say he wanted to support his family." "I can prove he was isolated," I said. I opened my laptop and pulled up the contact information for Mrs. Gable. She was the head nurse who had managed Grandpa's home care for the last 3 years of his life. I had kept in touch with her sporadically, mostly just to thank her for being there when I couldn't be. I put the call on speaker. "Mrs. Gable, it is Brielle Harlow." "Brielle," the older woman's voice came through, warm but concerned. "I saw the news, that terrible story about the necklace. Are you all right?" "I am fine, Mrs. Gable, but I need to ask you something about the time you spent with Grandpa, and I need you to be honest, even if it is ugly." "Ask me anything, dear." "How often did Victoria visit him? Not for business, not to sign papers, just to visit." There was a long silence on the other end. "Brielle, in 3 years. I think she sat with him twice without a briefcase. Every other time. She was there for 10 minutes. She would wake him up if he was sleeping, put a pen in his hand, and tell him it was administrative. He used to get so agitated after she left. His blood pressure would spike." "And my father?" "He would stand in the doorway," Mrs. Gable said, her voice dropping. "He wouldn't look at Leonard. He would just say, 'Just sign it, Dad, please, so we can go.' It broke my heart. I wrote it in the shift logs, you know. Patient distressed after family visit. I have the copies." I looked at Harriet. She gave a sharp, predatory nod. "Mrs. Gowell," Harriet said, leaning toward the phone. "This is Harriet Lowell. Would you be willing to testify to that in court? To the fact that visits were transactional and caused distress?" "For Leonard," Mrs. Gable said firmly, "in a heartbeat. That woman treated him like an ATM machine." We ended the call. The room was silent, save for the hum of the server stack in the corner. We had the motive, we had the method, and now we had the witness to the opportunity. "We don't just defend the suit regarding the necklace," Harriet announced, her voice steel. "We countersue. We file a cross-complaint for elder financial abuse, breach of fiduciary duty, and conversion of assets." "That escalates this from a civil dispute to a fraud case," Owen noted, closing his laptop. "If the judge accepts the premise of elder abuse, the damages treble. We are not talking about getting the $900,000 back. We are talking about nearly $3 million in liability. It will bankrupt them." "Good," I said. "They banked on me being a scared daughter. They forgot they were raising a prosecutor." Harriet began drafting the motion. "We need to be careful about the timing. We have the hearing in 3 weeks. We file this 48 hours before. We ambush them. If we file now, Sterling has time to manufacture a defense or hide the remaining assets." "Agreed," I said. "But we have another problem. The court of public opinion." I pulled up the local news feed on the wall monitor. Victoria had been busy. There was a new article in the Denver Post. "Heirloom Heist. How Greed is Tearing Apart the Harlow Family." "She has hired a crisis management firm," I said, pointing to the language. "Look at the phrasing. Deeply wounded. Legacy of love. Mental health concerns. These are talking points." I picked up my phone and texted Mara, an old friend from college who was now an investigative journalist for a national syndicate. "Meet me. Coffee. 30 minutes. Off the record." Mara met me at a dive bar 3 blocks away. She took one look at my face and ordered me a whiskey. "Neat." "You look like you went 12 rounds, she said. "Only 1 round, I said. "But the bell hasn't rung yet." "Victoria's PR people are blasting every news desk in the state," Mara said, sliding a folder across the table. "They are painting you as unstable. They have dug up some old disciplinary record from your high school days, skipping class, talking back to teachers. They are trying to build a profile of a troubled youth who grew into a thief." "Let them," I said, taking a sip of the whiskey. It burned, grounding me. "I am not going to fight them in the papers, Mara, not yet." "You have to say something," Mara argued. "If you stay silent, the narrative sets like concrete." "No," I shook my head. "Grandpa said something to me once. He said, 'Justice does not always look pretty on the news.' If I leak my side now, it becomes a he said, she said. It becomes a messy family drama. I don't want drama. I want a verdict." I leaned in. "I am going to give you the exclusive, Mara, but not today. In 3 weeks, after the judge unseals the evidence I am submitting, I will give you everything: the ledger, the medical report, the nurse's logs. You will have the story of how a socialite starved an old man of love to buy a condo in Vale. Mara's eyes widened. She smelled the Pulitzer potential. You have proof? I have the receipts, I said. Literally. Okay, Mara said. I will kill the hit piece my editor wanted to run. I will tell him we are waiting for a deeper angle, but you better deliver. Brielle. I will deliver. I returned to the office where Harriet and Owen were finalizing the timeline. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the glass table. We looked like a war council. Harriet, the general, Owen, the strategist, and me, the soldier who had finally come home to fight. One last thing, Harriet said, looking at the draft of the complaint. Once we file this, there is no going back. You destroy your father, Brielle. He is complicit in all of this. He signed the checks. The law does not care that he was weak. It only cares that he was involved. I looked at the timeline on the wall. I looked at the note Grandpa had written. I trusted Daniel. I was wrong. My father made his choice, I said, my voice steady. He chose his comfort over his conscience. He chose her over me. And worst of all, he chose her over the father who raised him. I picked up the pen and signed the affidavit attached to the cross complaint. The scratch of the pen on the paper was the loudest sound in the room. File it, I said. Let's burn the whole lie down. I walked to the window and looked out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, in their penthouse funded by stolen money, Victoria was probably toasting to her victory, thinking she had silenced me. She thought she was fighting a child who wanted a necklace. She had no idea she was fighting a forensic team that wanted her freedom. The preparation was done. The allies were gathered. The evidence was locked and loaded. Now, all we had to do was wait for them to walk into the trap. The glow of the television screen in my living room was the only light I allowed myself that Thursday evening. It was cold. The kind of artificial cold that seeps from a screen when you are watching a lie being manufactured in high definition. Victoria was on Wake Up Colorado, the state's most popular morning talk show. She sat on a beige sofa, her legs crossed at the ankles, wearing a pastel blue cardigan that suggested vulnerability and softness. It was a costume. Victoria hated pastels. She preferred structured blazers and sharp lines. But today, she was playing the role of the wounded mother bird. It just breaks my heart, Victoria said, her voice catching in her throat perfectly. She reached for a tissue, dabbing at the corner of an eye that remained stubbornly dry. You try to love a child as your own. You try to honor her mother's memory. And then, to be physically attacked because you tried to protect a family heirloom? It is devastating. The host, a woman with overly white teeth and a sympathetic tilt to her head, leaned in. And the necklace, Victoria? We hear it is valued at over $2 million. It is not about the money, Victoria insisted, looking straight into the camera. It has never been about the money. It is about the legacy. My husband, Daniel, is heartbroken. He sees his daughter spiraling, consumed by this greed. We just want to help her. I took a sip of my coffee. It was black and bitter. On the screen, they flashed a photo. It wasn't the photo of me receiving my certification as a fraud examiner. It wasn't a photo of me graduating with honors. It was a picture from my sophomore year of college, taken at a tailgate party. I was holding a red Solo cup, laughing with my head thrown back, looking messy and young. The caption beneath it read, "Troubled past? The daughter behind the assault." My phone buzzed against the coffee table. Then it buzzed again and again. Within minutes, it was vibrating constantly, a swarm of angry bees trapped in a glass box. I picked it up and opened Twitter. The hashtag Harlow Heist was trending locally. @TruthSeeker303 tweeted, "Imagine assaulting your stepmom over a necklace you didn't earn. Some kids are just born entitled. Team Victoria." @DenverMomLife wrote, "Watching Victoria Harlow on TV right now, you can see the pain in her eyes. Being a stepmom is so thankless. Shame on that girl. There were TikToks dissecting my body language in the blurry paparazzi photos taken outside the courthouse. Photos where I looked cold and detached because I was trying not to scream. They called me the Ice Queen of Lakeview. They called me a gold digger. They analyzed the cost of my handbag and used it as proof that I was stealing from my father to fund a lavish lifestyle. I scrolled through the venom with a clinical detachment. Most people would be crying. Most people would be drafting a frantic post to defend themselves. I did neither. I took screenshots. I screenshotted the threats. I screenshotted the defamatory claims that I had a history of drug abuse, an outright lie planted by anonymous accounts that appeared 2 days ago. I archived the posts where Victoria's personal assistant, using a pseudonym, commented about my violent temper. They thought they were destroying my reputation. I saw it differently. They were providing evidence of a coordinated smear campaign in a defamation suit, or as proof of malice in our elder abuse countersuit. This digital footprint was gold. Victoria was overplaying her hand. She was trying to win the court of public opinion because she knew she was about to lose in the court of law. The next morning, walking into Northbridge Insight Group felt like walking through a minefield. The lobby was quiet. As I passed the reception desk, the security guard, a man named Carl, who usually greeted me with a joke about the Broncos, simply nodded and looked away. I kept my head high, clutching my briefcase, and walked straight to my office. Brielle. The voice came from the corner office. It was Marcus Thorne, the managing partner of the firm. He was a man who spoke in bullet points and measured success in recovered assets. I stopped. Good morning, Marcus. In my office, now. I walked in and closed the door. Marcus was sitting behind his desk, a tablet in front of him. On the screen was the article from the Denver Post about the heirloom heist. He looked at me over his glasses. You are trending, Brielle, and not for closing the chaotic Henderson file. I am aware, I said, keeping my voice steady. It is a personal legal matter. It involves a dispute over my grandfather's estate. The article says you assaulted your stepmother. The article is based on a statement from a woman who is currently being investigated for dissipating nearly $1 million of my grandfather's assets, I replied. The assault allegation is a fabrication to leverage the civil suit. I have video evidence refuting it, which will be presented in court. Marcus stared at me for a long time. He was a forensic accountant at heart. He looked for the lie in the eyes. He didn't find one. I don't care about talk shows. Brielle, he said finally, leaning back. I care about facts, and I care about this firm's reputation. If you are guilty of theft, you can't work here. We trace stolen money. We don't employ people who take it. I didn't take it, I said. I recovered it, and I can prove ownership. Good, he said. Then do it. But until this is resolved, keep a low profile. No press statements from the office address. No using company resources for your defense. He paused, and his expression softened. Just a fraction. However, if you need personal time to meet with your legal counsel, take it. I am not docking your PTO for court dates. Thank you, Marcus. And Brielle? Yes? I met your grandfather once, at a charity dinner years ago. He seemed like a man who knew exactly where every penny was. If you are half as sharp as him, this Victoria woman has made a severe miscalculation. I walked out of his office feeling a strange sensation in my chest. It wasn't warmth, exactly, but it was stability. In my own home, I was a pariah. Here, in the cold, corporate world of finance, I was judged on my competence. When I got to my desk, there was a latte waiting for me. No note, just a hot cup of coffee from the good cafe down the street. I looked around the open plan office. Owen Riley, my ally in this war, was typing furiously at his desk 3 rows away. He didn't look up, but he raised a single hand in a wave. Another colleague, a junior analyst named Sarah, caught my eye and gave me a fierce, quick nod before diving back into her spreadsheets. They knew. They had read the stories, and they had chosen their side, not because of blood, but because they knew who I was. They knew I was the person who stayed late to help them find errors. They knew I was the one who brought donuts on Fridays. This was my family now. My phone pinged with an email notification. Sender: Daniel Harlow. Subject: Please, Brielle. I sat down and opened it. My hand hovered over the mouse. This was the man who had taught me to ride a bike. This was the man who had let a stranger take my mother's place. Brielle. The email began. I am writing this because I don't know what else to do. Victoria is a wreck. She hasn't slept in days. This court case is destroying her, and it is destroying our family name. I know you are angry. I know you think we have been unfair, but dragging this out in public, making these wild accusations about Dad's money, it is too much. Can we just stop? Please, we can sit down. Just the three of us. No lawyers. We can figure out a settlement. You can keep the necklace if it means that much to you. We can work out a payment plan for whatever you think the estate owes you. Just drop the countersuit. Drop the investigation. We are family. Dad wouldn't want this. He wouldn't want his granddaughter tearing apart his son. Please, honey, come home. Let's fix this. Dad. I read it twice. The manipulation was clumsy, wrapped in the guise of paternal love. He was terrified. He wasn't writing this because he missed me. He was writing it because he had seen the countersuit Harriet filed. He knew about the elder abuse charges. He was trying to settle before discovery forced him to open his bank records. I felt a pang of grief, sharp and sudden. I grieved for the father I wished I had, but then I looked at the bruise on my cheek, fading to a sickly yellow. I looked at the spreadsheet Owen had built, showing the money draining away from Grandpa's accounts while he lay dying. I hit reply. I did not write, "Dear Dad." I did not write, "I miss you." I wrote with the voice of the senior fraud investigator. Daniel, regarding your request for a settlement meeting, all communications must now go through my attorney, Harriet Lowell. Regarding your statement that Dad wouldn't want this, please refer to the following transaction records which will be entered into evidence. 1. On October 14, 2014, a transfer of $9,500 was made from Leonard Grant's municipal bond account to a joint account ending in 4452. The memo line read, "Home maintenance. No maintenance was performed." On October 15, 2014, a check for $9,000 was written from account 4452 to Victoria Harlow, personal. 2. On February 3, 2016, while Leonard Grant was hospitalized for pneumonia, a withdrawal of $9,800 was made via cashier's check. This coincides with the date of purchase for a diamond bracelet listed on Victoria Harlow's insurance rider. 3. There are 87 similar transactions over a period of 9 years, totaling $912,000. You signed off on 43 of these transfers as power of attorney. You were present for the others. You are correct that Grandpa wouldn't want this. He wouldn't want his son stealing from him. I am not tearing the family apart. I am balancing the ledger. Brielle Harlow. I pressed send. It was the final severance. By sending that email, I had locked him into a corner. If he didn't deny the specific transactions in his reply, it could be argued in court that he tacitly admitted to them. I wasn't talking to my father anymore. I was interrogating a hostile witness. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the silence of the office wash over me. It was done. Then, a notification popped up on my personal Facebook Messenger. It was in the Requests folder, the place where messages from strangers go. The name was unfamiliar, Eleanor Vance. I almost deleted it, thinking it was another hate message from a Victoria supporter, but the preview text stopped me. You don't know me, but I saw the news about Victoria Harlow. I think you should know that her name wasn't always Victoria Harlow, and she didn't always live in Colorado. My heart skipped a beat. I clicked open the message. Hi, Brielle, the message read. I am writing from Arizona. My uncle, Robert Vance, married a woman named Victoria Distinctive about 15 years ago. She was younger then, blonde, worked in real estate. She was charming. He was sick. By the time he died, his savings were gone, transferred into investment properties that turned out to be owned by her shell companies. She disappeared a month after the funeral. We tried to sue, but she had covered her tracks and we ran out of money. We settled out of court just to make her go away. I saw her picture on the news today. It is the same woman. If you are fighting her, you aren't just fighting for your grandpa. You are fighting for my uncle, too. Let me know if you need the case number from Scottsdale." I stared at the screen, my breath coming in shallow gasps. It wasn't just us. Victoria wasn't just a greedy stepmother who got lucky. She was a professional. This was a pattern, a modus operandi. She targeted older, wealthy men with assets that were liquid enough to steal but complex enough to hide. She married them, isolated them, drained them, and moved on. I took a screenshot of the message and forwarded it immediately to Harriet. "Harriet," I typed, "check the court records in Scottsdale, Arizona. Look for a Robert Vance. Look for a settlement agreement involving Victoria. This isn't a family dispute. This is a serial predator." My phone buzzed a minute later. It was Harriet. "On it," she replied. "I just had my paralegal pull the preliminary index. There are 2 civil filings in Arizona and 1 in Nevada under the name Victoria Caldwell. That must be her maiden name, Brielle. If we can admit this as prior bad acts evidence to show a pattern of conduct, we don't just win, we destroy her credibility forever." I looked back at the hate comments on my Twitter feed. Ungrateful daughter. Liar. I smiled. A cold, sharp smile. They could call me whatever they wanted. In 3 weeks, they were going to have to find a new name for Victoria. Defendant. I picked up my coffee and took a long sip. The war for public opinion was loud, messy, and painful. But I had just been handed the nuclear codes, and I was ready to launch, the day of the trial. The air in the courtroom was so thick with anticipation you could almost taste it. It tasted like stale coffee and expensive cologne. The gallery was packed to capacity. Reporters who usually covered city council meetings were jostling for space with national correspondents who had flown in for the $2 million necklace drama. I sat at the defendant's table, my back straight, my hands folded on the polished wood. Beside me, Harriet Lowell arranged her files with the slow, deliberate precision of a surgeon laying out scalpels. To my left, Owen Riley typed something on his laptop, the blue light reflecting in his glasses. Then, Victoria entered. She had clearly spent hours in front of a mirror perfecting the look of exhausted nobility. She wore a black dress, simple and severe, with no jewelry. Her makeup was a masterclass in manipulation, pale foundation to suggest sleepless nights, a touch of shadow under the eyes to hint at grief, but enough definition to ensure she still looked beautiful for the cameras. She walked with a slight stoop, leaning heavily on my father's arm. Daniel looked like a man walking to the gallows. He wore a gray suit that seemed a size too large for him now. He didn't look at the gallery. He didn't look at the judge. And he certainly didn't look at me. "All rise," the bailiff bellowed. Judge Beverly Watkins took the bench. She looked out at the circus in her courtroom with eyes that had seen every variety of human dishonesty. "We are back on the record," she said, her voice cutting through the murmur of the crowd. "Mr. Sterling, you may proceed with your opening arguments regarding the motion for asset seizure." Arthur Sterling stood up. He buttoned his jacket and walked to the center of the room, projecting his voice to the back row. "Your Honor," Sterling began, his tone dripping with righteous indignation. "We are here because a crime has been committed. Not a white-collar crime, but a violent one. My client, Mrs. Victoria Harlow, was physically assaulted in a private room at the Ridgepoint Hotel. She was attacked by her stepdaughter, a woman she raised and loved, and in the chaos of that attack, the defendant seized a diamond necklace valued at $2 million, a family heirloom that she now refuses to return." He turned and pointed a finger at me. "This is not a dispute about trusts or wills. This is a simple case of theft and battery. The defense has concocted a fantastical story about secret vaults and financial schemes to distract this court from the ugly truth. Brielle Harlow is a violent, unstable young woman who wants to hurt her father's wife. We ask that the necklace be immediately impounded and that all accounts related to the defendant be frozen pending a criminal investigation." He sat down. The gallery buzzed. It was a compelling story. Judge Watkins turned to our table. Ms. Lowell? Harriet stood up. She didn't walk to the center of the room. She stood at her place, resting her hand on a stack of documents that was 3 inches thick. Your Honor, Harriet said, her voice rasping slightly but clear as a bell. Mr. Sterling calls this a simple case. He is right. It is very simple. It is a case of a 20-year fraud that ended the moment my client found the key. Your offs. Harriet picked up the blue-bound document we had retrieved from the safe. The defense enters into evidence Defense Exhibit A, Harriet announced. The last will and testament of Leonard Grant, dated August 14, 2014. This document was held in a secure vault at Evermont Private Vaults, accessible only by the physical token, the necklace, currently in dispute. Sterling jumped up. Objection! Authentication! The document is notarized and witnessed by myself and Dr. Alan Evans, Harriet said calmly, and it explicitly revokes the will currently being used by Mr. and Mrs. Harlow. A ripple of noise went through the room. Judge Watkins waved the bailiff over to retrieve the document. She put on her reading glasses. The room went silent as she flipped through the pages. This will create a trust, Judge Watkins noted, reading aloud. The Elena and Descendants Fund, sole beneficiary, Brielle Harlow. She looked up, her eyes narrowing. Mr. Sterling, your filing claims that Mr. Leonard Grant was suffering from advanced dementia during this period and lacked the capacity to execute new legal documents. Is that correct? Yes, Your Honor, Sterling said, looking slightly nervous. We have affidavits from his caregivers stating he was confused and easily manipulated. That is interesting, Harriet cut in, because the defense enters Exhibit B, a complete neuropsychological evaluation performed by Dr. Alan Evans on August 16, 2014, 2 days after the will was signed. Harriet handed the report to the clerk. The report concludes that Leonard Grant was fully oriented, scored 30 out of 30 on the mini mental state examination, and showed no signs of cognitive decline. He was perfectly sane. Your Honor, he was just afraid. Sterling's face went a shade of pink that clashed with his tie. Afraid? Afraid of whom? Afraid of the people stealing his money, Harriet said. Your Honor, I would like to call Mr. Owen Riley to present the financial tracing. Owen stood up and connected his laptop to the courtroom's projection system. A large screen on the side wall flickered to life. It was a flowchart, but it looked more like an autopsy of a crime scene. What you are seeing, Owen said, his voice devoid of emotion, is a visualization of the cash flow from Leonard Grant's accounts over the last 10 years of his life. On the left side of the screen was a large blue circle labeled Grant Estate. On the right were 2 red circles labeled Daniel Harlow and Victoria Harlow. Between them was a spider web of arrows, hundreds of them. We have identified 87 separate transactions, Owen explained, using a laser pointer. Each one was structured to be under the $10,000 reporting limit, $9,500 here, $9,800 there. They were labeled as consulting fees, property management, and caregiver expenses. He clicked a button. The total sum appeared in bold red numbers at the bottom of the screen. Total misappropriated funds, $912,000. The gallery gasped. It wasn't a polite gasp. It was the sound of shock. Nearly $1 million. There are no invoices for these expenses, Owen continued. No contracts, no receipts, just cash moving from an elderly man's savings into the personal accounts of the plaintiffs, often coinciding with the purchase of luxury assets. He clicked again. A split screen appeared. On one side, a withdrawal of $9,000. On the other, a credit card payment of $9,000 to a luxury travel agency for a trip to Tuscany booked by Victoria. Objection! Sterling shouted, but his voice lacked its earlier power. This is circumstantial. These were family funds used for family expenses. Mr. Grant wanted to support his son and daughter-in-law. This is not theft. It is generosity. Harriet didn't even look at him. She picked up a piece of paper, the letter from the safe. Your Honor, Harriet said, if I may read from the decedent's own hand, this letter was found in the same vault. Judge Watkins nodded. Proceed. Harriet adjusted her glasses. My son and his wife tell me they need money for the house. They tell me they need money for doctors. But I see the new cars. I see the clothes. I sign the checks because if I don't, Victoria stops Brielle from visiting. But if they dispute this trust, if they fight you, Brielle, it means they know they took too much. Let the court look at the ledger. Harriet lowered the paper. They knew, Your Honor. This wasn't generosity. It was extortion. Victoria sat perfectly still. She was staring at the table, her knuckles white as she gripped a pen. She wasn't crying anymore. The grieving mother mask was slipping, revealing the cold, hard calculation underneath. This is slander, Sterling sputtered. But even if there is a dispute about the finances, it doesn't excuse the assault. The defendant attacked my client. That is the issue at hand. Actually, Harriet said, a small, dangerous smile playing on her lips. We are glad you brought that up, because we found a witness you missed. The doors at the back of the courtroom opened. A man in a dark uniform walked in. He looked nervous, clutching his cap in his hands. The defense calls Michael Henderson, Harriet said. Mr. Henderson took the stand. He was sworn in. Mr. Henderson? Harriet asked. Where were you employed on the night of the gala? I was the head of security for the night shift at the Ridge Point Hotel, he replied. And did you have access to the surveillance feeds? Yes, ma'am. Mr. Sterling claims there is no footage of the incident in the VIP room hallway because the cameras were down. Is that true? No, ma'am, Henderson said. The cameras were working fine, but Mrs. Harlow, she came to the security office about 20 minutes after the incident. She was very upset. She told us that the footage was private family business and demanded we delete it from the server. She said she would sue the hotel if it leaked. A murmur went through the crowd. Obstruction of justice. And did you delete it? Harriet asked. My manager did, Henderson said. But I made a backup, just in case. It didn't sit right with me. The way she was screaming at the girl, it didn't look like she was the victim. Your Honor, Harriet said, defense enters Exhibit D, the security footage. Sterling stood up to object, but Judge Watkins cut him off with a sharp look. Sit down, counselor. Play the tape. The lights dimmed. The screen flickered. The video was grainy, black and white, but the image was unmistakable. It showed the hallway outside the VIP room. Victoria and I came into the frame. She wasn't holding my hand. She had her fingers dug into my upper arm. She was dragging me. I was stumbling, trying to pull away. She shoved me toward the door. I stopped, putting my hands up in a defensive posture. Then, it happened. Victoria lunged. She grabbed the necklace around my neck with both hands and yanked. I fell back. She stepped forward and slapped me. It was a vicious, full-force blow. I didn't hit back. I didn't attack her. I simply curled my hands over the necklace to protect it and backed away into the room. The video ended. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. It was the silence of a narrative collapsing. Victoria's story, that I had attacked her, that I had snatched the necklace, was a lie. A demonstrably false, recorded lie. Judge Watkins stared at the blank screen for a long moment. Then she turned her chair slowly to face the plaintiff's table. Mrs. Harlow, the judge said. Her voice was quiet, dangerously so. Victoria looked up. Her face was pale, stripped of all its artifice. Would you like to explain to this court, Judge Watkins asked, why the grieving, terrified victim I saw on the morning news looks remarkably like the aggressor in that video? Victoria opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She looked at Sterling, but he was busy shuffling papers, distancing himself from the perjury happening right next to him. Victoria stammered. It was emotional. I was distraught. She was stealing my jewelry. Your jewelry? Judge Watkins raised an eyebrow. The jewelry that opens a vault containing a will disinheriting your husband? The jewelry that proves you have been looting an elderly man's estate for a decade? I was trying to protect the family, Victoria shouted, her voice cracking, finally losing her composure. He was ruining us. That old man. He was hoarding that money while Daniel was drowning. I did what I had to do. The admission hung in the air. She didn't say, I didn't steal it. She said, I did what I had to do. Daniel put his head in his hands. It was over. The image of the devoted wife, the victimized stepmother, the pillar of the community. It had all dissolved in the harsh light of a projector screen. I looked at Victoria. I expected to feel triumph. I expected to feel a surge of joy. But as I watched her unravel, watching her face twist into a mask of ugly, desperate entitlement, I just felt cold. Grandpa was right. The money hadn't rotted her. She had been rotten all along. The money just gave her a reason to show it. Bailiff, Judge Watkins said, her voice hard. Ensure Mrs. Harlow does not leave the building. We are going to take a recess. And when we return, I expect the district attorney to be present. The gavel banged. It sounded like a gunshot. The room erupted into chaos. Reporters shouting questions. People standing up to get a better look at the woman who had just confessed to destroying her own family. I didn't move. I sat there, touching the necklace around my neck. The weight of it felt lighter now. The secret was out. The ghost was free. And the Harlows were finally, truly, bankrupt. The gavel banged, signaling a 30-minute recess. The sound echoed in my chest like a second heartbeat, frantic and irregular. The courtroom dissolved into a hive of noise, reporters shouting into phones, legal aides shuffling papers, the gallery murmuring with the thrill of the scandal. I stood up, my legs feeling heavy, like they were filled with lead. Harriet touched my arm. Go get some air, she said softly. Do not speak to the press. Do not speak to them. I nodded and slipped out the side door into the marble corridor. It was cooler here, the air conditioning humming a low, steady bass note. I walked toward the water fountain, needing to wash the taste of adrenaline out of my mouth. Brielle. The voice was not loud, but it stopped me dead in my tracks. I turned slowly. Victoria was standing there. She was not crying anymore. The trembling, fragile victim who had sat at the plaintiff's table moments ago had vanished. In her place stood the woman I remembered from my childhood. The woman who inspected dust on the mantel with a white glove. The woman who calculated the cost of everything and the value of nothing. Her lawyer, Arthur Sterling, was standing about 20 feet away near a potted ficus. He had his phone to his ear, pretending to be engrossed in a call, but his eyes were locked on us. He was the lookout. This was a sanctioned approach. What do you want? I asked, my voice echoing slightly in the empty hall. Harriet said all communication goes through her. Victoria took a step closer. She smelled of Chanel and hairspray, a scent that used to make me nauseous as a teenager. Harriet is a dinosaur, she said, her voice low and dangerously calm. She wants a trial because she wants a win for her resume. But you and I? We know how messy this gets. She smoothed the front of her dress. Let us be practical. Brielle, the judge is angry. The video looks bad. I admit that. But juries are fickle. I can go back on that stand and talk about the stress of caregiving. I can cry about how hard it was to watch Leonard deteriorate. I can spin a story that makes that slap look like a moment of desperate panic. She paused, waiting for me to flinch. I didn't. So, she continued, her tone shifting to that of a merchant haggling over a rug. Let us cut a deal, right here, 50-50. We split the trust. You take the cabin in Alpine Creek. I know you always liked that dusty old place. We liquidate the rest of the portfolio and divide it down the middle. You walk away with $5 or $6 million. You are still young. You are still rich. I stared at her, genuinely stunned by the audacity. You want to settle? I want to end the noise, she said, flicking a piece of lint off her sleeve. This is bad for business. It is bad for your father's reputation. You win, I win. We go home. And the video? I asked. The fact that you assaulted me? She waved her hand dismissively, as if swatting away a fly. "Oh, grow up, Brielle. It was a slap. I didn't shoot you. A few tears on Good Morning America. An apology for losing my composure under extreme duress. And the public will forgive me in a week. People love a redemption arc." The coldness of it made my skin crawl. She viewed violence as just another PR hurdle to clear. "And what about my mother?" I asked, my voice trembling with a rage I tried to suppress. "What about the money you stole? What about the $900,000 you drained from Grandpa's accounts while he was dying? You want to split that too? You want to divide the spoils of the fraud you committed against a defenseless old man?" Victoria's eyes narrowed. The mask of the negotiator slipped, revealing the predator underneath. "Don't be dramatic. It wasn't fraud. It was management." "It was theft," I snapped. "He didn't want to give it to you." "He didn't know what he wanted," Victoria hissed. Stepping into my personal space, her voice rose, sharp and venomous. "That old man was obsessed with the past. He was obsessed with you and that pathetic memory of your mother. He was going to leave you everything. Brielle, everything. He was going to let your father rot in that failing construction business just to prove a point." She poked a manicured finger at my chest. "I didn't steal. I balanced the scales. I took what Daniel was owed. I made sure your father had a life while his father was too busy mourning a ghost to sign a check." My breath hitched. There it was. The admission. He was going to leave you everything. I balanced the scales. She wasn't denying the diversion of funds. She was justifying it as a necessary correction to Grandpa's will. She admitted to overriding his intent because she felt entitled to the money. "So you admit it," I whispered. "You forced him." "I did what was necessary for this family," she spat. "Family?" The word came from behind her. We both turned. Daniel Harlow was standing there. My father. He looked gray. The fluorescent lights of the hallway washed out what little color he had left in his face. He had clearly followed Victoria out, perhaps sensing that she was about to go off script. He walked toward us, his movements stiff. He looked at Victoria, then at me. He saw the bruise on my cheek, really saw it, maybe for the first time without the filter of his wife's excuses. "Connie," he said to Victoria, using a nickname I hadn't heard in years. "Lower your voice." "She is being impossible, Daniel," Victoria said, turning to him, seeking an ally. "I offered her half, and she is standing there acting like a saint." Daniel turned to me. He tried to smile, but it was a grotesque, pained expression. "Brielle," he said, his voice wheedling. "Sweetheart, listen to her. You are making this go too far. The police, the prosecutors. Once that machine starts, it doesn't stop. We can fix this. Just us. No lawyers." He reached out, as if to touch my shoulder, but stopped when I took a sharp step back. "Victoria is just passionate," Daniel said, glancing nervously at the courtroom doors. "She has a hot temper. You know that. She didn't mean to hurt you. She was just scared. We are all scared." "Scared of what? Dad?" I asked. "Scared of losing the money? Or scared of going to prison?" "Don't use that word," he said quickly. "No one is going to prison. This is a family misunderstanding. Tell me what you want. You want money? We can liquidate the portfolio. You want the house? It is yours. Just drop the countersuit, please." I looked at him. I looked at the man who had carried me on his shoulders when I was 5. I looked at the man who had sat at the dinner table for 10 years and watched Victoria erase me from the family. "I have a question for you, Dad," I said. My voice was steady, frighteningly so. "And I want the truth. For once in your life, just tell me the truth." He swallowed hard. Okay, ask me." "Did you sign the papers?" I asked. "The transfers? The withdrawals? The 87 times money left Grandpa's account and went into yours. Did you sign them?" He looked down at his shoes. He shifted his weight. "Brielle, business was bad. The market crashed in 2008 and we never really recovered. I had payroll to meet. I had mortgages." "Did you sign them?" I repeated, cutting him off.
Yes, he whispered.
And did you know, I pressed, did you know that money was coming from the bonds he had set aside for the trust? Did you know Grandpa didn't want to give it to you?
He looked up then. His eyes were wet. But it wasn't the moisture of remorse. It was the moisture of self-pity.
He had so much. Brielle, Daniel said, his voice gaining a sudden, defensive whine. He was sitting on millions, millions, and he was just letting it sit there in low-yield bonds. He didn't need it. He was old. He was dying. He wasn't going to miss it.
The air left the hallway.
He wasn't going to miss it, I repeated.
I am a man, Daniel said, straightening his back slightly, trying to salvage some shred of dignity. A man has to provide. A man has to keep face.
Do you know what it is like to ask your father for money at 50 years old? It is humiliating. Victoria. She found a way to make it work without me having to beg. She just handled the paperwork. She fixed it so we could live.
She stole it, I said. And you let her.
I took my inheritance early, he snapped. That is all it was. It was going to be mine eventually anyway.
No, I said. It wasn't. The will proved that. It was never going to be yours. He knew you would waste it.
Daniel flinched as if I had slapped him.
He saved it for me, I said, the realization hitting me with the force of a physical blow. He saved it because he knew you would let her take everything, and you did. You let her rob him while he was helpless, and you let her hit me while I was defenseless. You aren't a victim. Dad, you are the accomplice.
Daniel stared at me, his mouth opening and closing, but no words came out. The reality of what he had just admitted hung between us. He had justified theft with entitlement. He had justified abuse with pride.
I put my hand in my pocket. My fingers brushed against the cool glass of my phone.
I had started the voice recording app the moment I stepped out of the courtroom. It was a habit, a reflex from 5 years of fraud investigation. Always record the sidebar. Every word. Victoria's admission that she balanced the scales because Grandpa wanted to give me everything. Daniel's confession that he signed the papers because he wouldn't miss it. It was all there, captured in high-definition audio.
I am not settling, I said.
Victoria's head snapped up.
What?
I am not settling, I said louder. I don't want half. I don't want the house in Alpine Creek. I don't want a payout. Don't be stupid, Victoria snarled. You think you can destroy us? You think you can walk away unscathed? I am already scathed, I said, pointing to my cheek. You did that, but you are done hurting me. I looked at Daniel. You chose, I said. When you signed those papers, you chose her. When you watched her slap me and lied about it to the police, you chose her. So stay with her. Go down with her.
Brielle, wait.
Daniel stepped forward, reaching for me. You are my daughter. I stepped back, out of his reach. No, I said. I am Leonard Grant's granddaughter, and I am the person who is going to make sure everyone knows what you did to him. Victoria laughed. It was a harsh, barking sound. You think the court cares about your moral high ground? You think a judge is going to side with the greedy daughter over the grieving widow? Innocence proves nothing in this system, you little brat. Leverage does, and we have better lawyers. Then I guess we will see, I said. You will regret this, Victoria hissed, her face contorted into a mask of pure malice. I will spend every last cent of that estate burying you in legal fees. I will ruin your career. I will make sure you never work in this city again. You can try, I said, but you might want to save your money for your bail. I turned my back on them. It was the hardest thing I had ever done. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to scream, to cry, to beg my father to wake up. But the part of me that Grandpa had trained, the part that respected evidence over emotion, took control. I walked away down the long marble corridor. I could hear Daniel calling my name, a weak, pathetic sound echoing off the walls. Brielle, Brielle. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I walked straight to the courtroom doors. I pulled the phone from my pocket and stopped the recording. Saved. 12:42 p.m. I pushed the doors open and stepped back into the cool, conditioned air of the court. Harriet looked up from her table. She saw my face, not tear-streaked, but set in stone. She saw the phone in my hand. She raised an eyebrow. I sat down beside her. I placed the phone on the table and slid it toward her. "They offered a settlement," I whispered. "And?" Harriet asked. "And they admitted everything," I said. "Motive, intent, execution, it is all there." Harriet's eyes widened. She looked at the phone, then at me. A slow, fierce smile spread across her face. "Well then," Harriet said, opening her file, "I suppose we should let the judge hear it." I looked at the empty door where my father and stepmother would soon re-enter. I felt a strange lightness in my chest. The last tether had been cut. I wasn't waiting for them to love me anymore. I wasn't waiting for an apology that would never come. I checked the clasp of the necklace one last time. It was secure. The bailiff called for order. The recess was over. The final act was about to begin. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of the dark. I was the one bringing the light. The user wants the 10th and final part of a revenge story written in English, based on a specific outline. Outline analysis, Part 10. Return to court. Harriet asks to present the audio recording from the hallway. Admissibility. Victoria's lawyer objects, but the judge allows it because it wasn't a normal family chat, but a discussion in the context of a legal dispute with clear intent. The recording. The room hears Victoria's voice. "The old man wanted to give you everything. He was blind. I just balanced the scales for your father." Contemptuous tone. Judge's reaction. Asks Victoria if she still claims it's about wounded motherhood or property. Victoria is silenced. Counterclaim. Harriet shifts stance from defendant to plaintiff, demanding repayment of withdrawn funds plus interest, alleging elder abuse and breach of fiduciary duty. Reading the real will. The true will is read. It explicitly mentions the trust for Brielle, citing that Daniel was fully supported in the past and warning that any challenge by Daniel or his wife proves they don't respect his wishes. Reactions. Daniel hangs his head. Victoria grips her chair. Nail marks. Judge's summary. Trust is valid. Grandpa was sane. Necklace belongs to the trust Brielle. Victoria's assault plus media campaign pressure on beneficiary. The verdict. Trust upheld. Victoria and Daniel must repay the withdrawn money plus interest. Assault case moved to criminal court, but judge notes physical abuse in financial dispute context. Aftermath. In court, Victoria cries. Real tears of ruin, not acting. Daniel tries to approach Brielle. "I didn't expect this." Brielle's response, quotes, "Grandpa, who chooses money over family can't blame the money." Press. Reporter asks if she feels happy gloating. Brielle. "I didn't win. I protected Grandpa's wish. Everything was lost when he died." Final act. Brielle leaves court, removes necklace, puts it in box, sends it back to the safe, under her name. Cemetery scene. Visits Mom and Grandpa. Tells them, "They can't touch your things anymore, and I won't let them touch me anymore." Ending. Walking away to the car. No long epilogue. Just a clear present. She decides who enters her life. Outro. Thank the audience. Ask for comments. Where are they listening from? Subscribe to Lila Revenge Stories. Like, hype. Writing constraints. Language, English. Length 1400-1800 words. Format. Just the story content. No title introduction. Numbers. Spelled out, $2 million, not 2 mamas. First-person perspective, Brielle. Tone. Emotional climax. Logical resolution. Cinematic ending. Drafting. Section by section. The recording. The tension as Harriet plays the tape. The shock of hearing the unvarnished truth. The specific lines about balancing the scales. Judge's interrogation. The judge pinning Victoria down. The shift in power dynamics. The real will. Reading the specific clause about Daniel.
the emotional impact on him realizing his father knew his nature. The verdict, the legal smackdown, restitution, the separation of the assault charge. The confrontation, Daniel's pathetic attempt to reconcile, Brielle's cold, final quote. The press, the refusal to be the villain or the gloating victor, just the guardian. The necklace, returning it to the dark, it's a burden, not a trophy. The graveyard, the spiritual closure. The walk away, the theme of boundaries and adulthood. Refining the details. Make the judge's voice authoritative. Describe Victoria's breakdown vividly, the cracking of the facade. Ensure the transition from the chaotic court to the quiet cemetery is stark. The ending needs to feel final but open to her new life. Outro construction. Thank you so much for listening to my story. Comment down below where you are listening from. Subscribe to Lila Revenge Stories. Hit the like button and the hype button. Let's write. Self-correction during writing. Ensure I don't use inappropriately. Use standard punctuation. Check the word count logic. 1,400 words is substantial for a denouement. So I need to really flesh out the courtroom reactions, the reading of the will, and the internal monologue during the cemetery scene. Specific focus. The twist of the recording needs to land hard. The realization that the caring stepmother was actually balancing scales destroys her defense. Financial details. $912,000. $2 million necklace. Write these as spoken. Let's go. Drafting the narrative. The courtroom buzzes. Harriet stands up. Your Honor, I have one final piece of evidence. Victoria's lawyer objects. This is a surprise. We haven't seen this. Judge. Is it relevant? Harriet. It goes to the heart of the intent. The tape plays. Victoria's voice fills the room. He was blind. I balanced the scales. The reaction. The judge's icy stare. The counterclaim. The will. Any attempt by Daniel. That line hurts Daniel. The verdict. The restitution order. The aftermath. The cemetery. The end. Let's write the full text. Self-correction on word count. To hit 1,400 plus words. I need to slow down the reading of the will and the judge's ruling. Describe the physical sensations, the temperature of the room, the sound of the gavel, the look on Daniel's face. Final polish. Check for the specific outro requirements. Ready. Detailed narrative flow. Re-entry. Walking back in. The heavy atmosphere. The tape. Harriet argues for admission. Judge allows it. Exception to hearsay, privacy, because of the adversarial nature. The playback. The shock. The pivot. Harriet moves to plaintiff on the countersuit. The will. Reading the full text. The specific exclusion of Daniel if he fights. This breaks him. The judgment. Detailed ruling. Not just you win, but why. The logic of the trust. The rejection of the family money defense. The fall. Victoria's reaction. Not a movie villain's scream, but a realistic collapse of a narcissist. The father. The rejection. The press. The final statement. The ritual. Returning the necklace. Visiting the grave. Departure. The car scene. Let's generate. Reviewing the prompt requirements again. No ellipses. Unless grammatically necessary, I will avoid them to be safe or fix them. Numbers written out. Outro included. Length 1,400, 1,800. Okay, proceeding. Mental check on hype button. Is that a standard YouTube feature? Maybe a specific platform feature? I will include it as requested. Let's write. Drafting the text. Mental preview. The doors of the courtroom swung open. Harriet placed the phone on the lectern. The voice was tinny but unmistakable. Judge Watkins leaned forward. The verdict was a hammer blow. I walked out. The cemetery was quiet. Thank you for listening. Okay, looks good. The tone should be explosive emotion but logical. One specific check. Twist about the recording. The prompt says Harriet asks to present it. Lawyer objects. Judge approves. Check. Daniel tries to approach. Check. Brielle quotes Grandpa. Check. Press question. Check. Necklace back in safe. All systems go. Self-correction regarding ellipses. The prompt says, No kodo. Suthian titu dong sulai lai body. I will ensure sentences are complete or use dashes for interruptions. Self-correction regarding numbers. $2 million. 10 years. 900,000. Let's do it. Word count strategy. Spend time on the judge's monologue and the reading of the will. Describe the feeling of the weight lifting off Brielle. Describe the setting of the cemetery in detail. Writing the content. End of thought process. Start of final output generation. When the bailiff opened the heavy oak doors, the noise of the gallery hit me like a physical wave. The room was packed. Every seat was taken, and people were standing along the back wall. They were there for the spectacle, for the $2 million necklace drama, as the morning news had dubbed it. They wanted a catfight. They were about to witness an execution. I walked to my seat, my heels clicking a steady rhythm on the parquet floor. I didn't look at the reporters. I didn't look at the sketches artists were frantically drawing. I looked straight ahead at the empty bench where Judge Watkins would soon seal the fate of the Harlow family. Victoria and Daniel entered a moment later. Victoria had reapplied her powder, but she couldn't hide the tension in her jaw. She walked with a rigid, brittle energy, staring straight ahead. Daniel trailed behind her, looking like a man who was walking through a nightmare he couldn't wake up from. He sat down, hunching his shoulders, trying to make himself small. "All rise," the bailiff announced. Judge Watkins swept in, her robes billowing. She sat down, adjusted her glasses, and looked at the two tables with a gaze that could strip paint off a wall. "We are back on the record," she said. "Ms. Lowell, you indicated before the recess that you had a final piece of evidence to submit regarding the intent of the parties." Harriet stood up. She held my phone in her hand, sealed in an evidence bag. "Yes, Your Honor," Harriet said, her voice ringing clear in the hush of the room. "During the recess, the plaintiffs approached my client in the hallway outside this courtroom. They attempted to coerce a settlement. During that conversation, both Mrs. Victoria Harlow and Mr. Daniel Harlow made statements that directly addressed the motivation behind the dissipation of the estate and their knowledge of the decedent's true wishes." Arthur Sterling shot out of his chair. "Objection! Your Honor, settlement discussions are privileged. Anything said in the hallway is inadmissible." "Under normal circumstances, Mr. Sterling, you would be correct," Judge Watkins said, leaning forward. "However, if the conversation involves the admission of a crime or fraudulent intent, privilege does not apply. Furthermore, given the nature of the countersuit regarding elder abuse, statements made by the accused regarding their handling of the victim's assets are highly relevant." Overruled. Sterling sank back into his chair, his face draining of color. He knew. He hadn't been close enough to hear the words, but he knew his client. Harriet connected the phone to the court's audio system. "Play it," she said to the clerk. The courtroom speakers crackled. Then, the silence was shattered by the sound of Victoria's voice. It was sharp, dismissive, and dripping with arrogance. "That old man was obsessed with the past. He was going to leave you everything. Brielle, everything. He was going to let your father rot in that failing construction business just to prove a point." The gallery gasped. It wasn't the polite gasp of the morning session. It was a collective intake of breath at the sheer cruelty of the tone. Then came the line that sealed her coffin. "I didn't steal. I balanced the scales. I took what Daniel was owed." And then Daniel's voice, weak and whining. He had so much. Brielle. He was sitting on millions. He wasn't going to miss it. The recording ended. The silence that followed was heavier than anything I had ever felt. It was the silence of a truth so ugly that no one knew how to look at it. Judge Watkins slowly turned her chair to face the plaintiff's table. She took off her glasses and laid them on the bench. "Mrs. Harlow," the judge said.
Her voice was quiet, but it carried to every corner of the room. Do you still maintain that this lawsuit is about a grieving mother trying to protect a family heirloom? Or would you like to amend your statement to reflect what we just heard? That this is a dispute about your decision to override the legal will of a dying man because you felt his money belonged to you. Victoria opened her mouth. She looked at the judge, then at the gallery, then at her lawyer. There was no escape. The victim narrative had just been decapitated. She closed her mouth, her throat working as she swallowed the dry lump of defeat. She said nothing. "Let the record show the plaintiff is silent," Judge Watkins said. Harriet stepped forward. "Your Honor, in light of this admission, the defense moves to amend our filing. We are no longer just the respondent. We are countersuing for the immediate restitution of $912,000, plus statutory interest. We are alleging elder financial abuse, conversion of assets, and breach of fiduciary duty against both Victoria Harlow and Daniel Harlow." "Granted," Judge Watkins said immediately. "Now, let us address the document that started this, the will." The judge picked up the blue-bound document Harriet had retrieved from the vault. She opened it to the final page. "I will read the relevant clause into the record," Judge Watkins announced. "To my son, Daniel, I leave the sum of $1. I have supported him throughout his life, covering his debts and his failures. I have watched him allow his wife to isolate me in my own home. Therefore, the entirety of my remaining estate, including the contents of the Evermont Vault and the trust known as the Elena and Descendants Fund, shall pass solely to my granddaughter, Brielle Harlow." The judge paused, looking over the rim of the paper at Daniel. "Furthermore," the judge continued reading, "should Daniel or his wife attempt to contest this trust, or claim incompetence on my part, let this document serve as evidence that they do not respect my will, but rather seek to plunder what they did not earn." Daniel bowed his head. He stared at the floor, his shoulders shaking slightly. He wasn't crying for his father. He was crying because he had been stripped naked in front of the entire city. Everyone knew now. Everyone knew he wasn't the dutiful son. He was the weak accomplice who had waited for his father to die so he could pay his mortgage. Victoria sat frozen. Her hands were gripping the arms of her chair so tightly that I could see the white indentations of her nails digging into the leather. She was vibrating with a contained fury, a pressure cooker about to explode. Judge Watkins closed the folder. She picked up her gavel. "This court finds as follows," she declared. "First, the trust established by Leonard Grant is valid. The medical evidence provided by the defense proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that Mr. Grant was of sound mind when he executed these documents. The accusations of dementia were a fabrication by the plaintiffs to facilitate their control over his assets. Second, the diamond necklace is the physical property of the Elena and Descendants Fund. It is the key to the vault, and therefore it belongs solely to the beneficiary, Brielle Harlow. It is not marital property. It is not an heirloom for Mrs. Harlow to wear to galas. Third, the judge's voice hardened. The court finds that Victoria Harlow and Daniel Harlow engaged in a systematic pattern of financial abuse. The withdrawal of funds labeled as caregiver expenses was a fraudulent scheme to siphon assets. You are hereby ordered to repay the estate the sum of $912,000. In addition, due to the malicious nature of the act and the vulnerability of the victim, I am applying the statutory multiplier for elder abuse. The total judgment against you is $2.7 million. A shockwave went through the room. $2.7 million. It was everything they had. It was the penthouse. It was the vacation home. It was the cars. It was total ruin. "Finally," Judge Watkins said, looking at Victoria. "Regarding the assault charge, while that is a matter for the criminal courts, this court notes that the physical altercation was an extension of the financial coercion. I am forwarding the video evidence and the transcript of today's hearing to the district attorney with a recommendation that they pursue charges for assault and attempted grand larceny." Bang. The gavel hit the wood. It was the sound of the end. Victoria let out a sound that was half sob, half scream. It wasn't the pretty, delicate crying she had done on the talk show. This was an ugly, guttural sound. She put her face in her hands, her shoulders heaving. The facade was gone. The socialite was gone. All that was left was a woman who had gambled everything on her ability to bully a young girl, and lost. Daniel stood up slowly. He looked dazed. He turned and looked at me across the aisle. His eyes were red-rimmed and hollow. He took a step toward me, his hand reaching out instinctively.
Brielle, he croaked, his voice cracking. Con, daughter, I didn't know it would be like this.
I looked at him. I felt a phantom ache in my chest, the echo of the little girl who used to wait by the window for him to come home. But then I looked at the necklace in my hand. I looked at Harriet, standing tall and proud beside me. I didn't step back this time. I stood my ground. Grandpa Leonard used to say something, I said, my voice calm enough to be heard by the reporters pressing against the railing. He said that anyone who chooses money over their own blood cannot blame the money when they end up alone. Daniel flinched. He stopped moving. He let his hand drop to his side. He knew there was no coming back from this. There was no family dinner that could fix it. Goodbye, Daniel, I said. I turned and walked toward the exit. The press swarmed immediately. Microphones were shoved in my face, cameras flashing like lightning.
Ms. Harlow, how do you feel?
Do you feel vindicated? Are you happy that you took them for everything? One reporter, a young man with eager eyes, shouted over the din. Brielle, do you feel gloating now that you have won it all? I stopped. I looked directly into his camera lens. The chaos around me seemed to fade into a dull roar. I didn't win anything, I said quietly. I didn't do this to get rich. I did this to protect what my grandfather wanted. As for having it all, the day he died, I lost the only thing that mattered. You can't win back a family that never existed. I pushed past them. I walked out of the courthouse and into the bright, blinding sunlight of the Colorado afternoon. The air tasted sweet. It tasted like freedom. I walked to my car, sat in the driver's seat, and locked the doors. For a moment, just a moment, I let myself shake. The adrenaline crashed, leaving me feeling hollowed out. I reached up and unclasped the necklace. The heavy platinum weight slid into my palm. It was beautiful. It was cold. It was $2 million of compressed carbon and tragedy. I didn't put it back on. I placed it gently into its velvet box. I wasn't going to wear it. I wasn't going to sell it. I drove straight to Evermont Private Vaults. I went down to the quiet basement, back to box 2147. I placed the necklace inside, next to the empty space where the files had been. Keep it safe, I whispered to the empty room. I closed the door. I spun the dial. I set a new code. A code that only I knew. A code that no amount of bullying or guilt-tripping would ever extract from me. That evening, as the sun began to dip behind the Rockies, painting the sky in bruised purples and oranges, I drove to the cemetery on the edge of town. It was quiet there. The wind rustled through the aspen trees, a sound like whispering ghosts. I walked to the family plot. There were 2 stones side by side, Elena Grant and Leonard Grant. I stood there for a long time. I didn't cry. I had done my crying years ago, in a lonely bedroom in a house that didn't want me. It is done, I said to the stones. They can't touch your things anymore. Grandpa, the trust is safe. The truth is out. I touched the cold granite of my mother's headstone. And they can't touch me anymore. Mom, I stopped waiting for him. I stopped hoping he would choose us. I crouched down and pulled a small weed from the base of the stone. I am going to be okay. I told them. I am going to be more than okay. I am going to be free. I stood up and brushed the dirt from my hands. The sun had set. The air was getting cold. I turned and walked back toward my car. I didn't look back at the graves. I didn't look back at the city skyline where my father was likely sitting in a lawyer's office, watching his life dismantle. I got into my car and started the engine. The road ahead was dark, illuminated only by my own headlights. But that was enough. I didn't need them to light my way anymore. I was Brielle Harlow. I was the granddaughter of Leonard Grant, and for the first time in my life, the only person deciding where I was going next was me. Thank you so much for listening to my story. It was a long journey, but I'm glad I could share the truth with you. Please comment down below where you are listening from. I would love to hear your thoughts on the verdict, and if you think justice was truly served. Don't forget to subscribe to the Lila Revenge Stories channel. Hit that like button, and smash the hype button to help this story reach more people who need to hear it. Stay strong, and remember, the ledger never lies.